Chapter 313. Lin Xiao looked at the gray rabbit, then looked up at Lu Jun and said, "No way?" Lu Jun just shrugged and said, "I'm just guessing." Lin Xiao glanced at the gray rabbit and then picked it up. At this time, Tong Tong stood at her feet and looked up at her. "I want to hold the rabbit." Lin Xiao glanced at him and bent down to put the rabbit in his arms. However, the gray fur ball didn't seem to like him and struggled hard in his arms. Tong Tong couldn't hold it firmly and the gray fur ball jumped out after a few tries. Lin Xiao thought about it and closed her eyes to look outside. She went out in a flash. She stood in front of the living room and dining room of Wu Chengyue's house, which was also the place where she returned Lingling to Wu Chengyue. She sniffed and found that Wu Chengyue and Tiny Tot were upstairs, so she turned around and walked to the stairs, then looked back at the people eating in the dining room. Her figure flashed and she entered the space again. Then she picked up the gray fur ball that was being chased by Tong Tong and flashed out again. After putting the gray fur ball on the stairs, Lin Xiao turned around and walked out of Wu Chengyue's house. Then she went to Lin Feng's house. When Wu Chengyue carried Wu Yueling, who was dressed down, Wu Chengyue saw a big fur ball squatting on the stairs. "Huh? What is this?" Hearing Wu Chengyue's curious voice, Wu Yueling also looked back and then froze for a moment. But very quickly, she reacted and stretched out her body in the direction of the gray fur ball. Seeing his daughter's reaction, although she didn't show it on her face. However, those sparkling eyes told Wu Chengyue that his daughter wanted that fur ball. "Do you know what this is?" As soon as Wu Chengyue finished speaking, he saw the fur ball move and then turn around. A rabbit head with 2 long ears looked at Wu Yueling. "Ah, isn't this the rabbit I saw last time? Huh, why does this rabbit look a bit like the female zombie's rabbit?" Wu Chengyue looked and it turned out to be a rabbit. And it looked a bit familiar. Wasn't that the one Lingling was carrying when she came out of the space in Kengzhou last time? He didn't care at that time because his mind was on his daughter. It was just a cursory glance. Now that he took a closer look, why did it feel like the one beside the female zombie that he had struck with lightning last time? As he spoke, he put Wu Yueling down. As soon as Wu Yueling landed on the ground, she immediately rushed towards the gray fur ball. The gray fur ball even bounced towards Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling happily picked up the gray furry ball and followed Wu Chengyue down. "Lingling, you can't eat with it in your arms. Can you put it on the chair next to you?" After sitting on the chair, everyone looked curiously at the rabbit in Lingling's arms. Wu Chengyue pulled an empty chair beside her and said to her, "Miss, isn't this the gray rabbit in Miss Lu's space? Why is it here?" Lin Feng said in surprise. Wu Chengyue watched as his daughter obediently placed the gray rabbit on an empty chair. Then said, We saw it when we were coming down from the stairs just now. This was her rabbit, but why would she leave it for Lingling?" "It's her rabbit, but why did she leave it for Lingling?" Lin Feng said, "I've seen this rabbit in her space. I feel that it's living a comfortable life there." Wu Chengyue sat next to Wu Yueling and picked up some food from the bowl Meng Yu gave her. Wu Yueling ate with a fork and chopsticks while looking at the fur ball. "I have a question. I suddenly thought of it when I saw the rabbit. Meng Yu, have you seen this rabbit before?" Wu Chengyue suddenly said. Then turned to Meng Yu and asked. Meng Yu stared at the rabbit for a while and shook her head. "Have I seen it before? I don't seem to remember." Wu Chengyue reminded her. 2 months ago, Lingling was abducted by someone. Then we found her in a farm. Lingling was also holding a gray rabbit. It was just a little smaller. Think about it." Hearing this, Meng Yu's expression froze for a moment. Then her eyes lit up and she nodded. "Oh yes, there was indeed a rabbit at that time. Lingling didn't want to part with it." After saying that, she stared at the gray-furred ball in front of her, which was much bigger than before. "Now that you mention it, it really does look like it." Wu Chengyue turned to look at Yuan Tianqing and the others. He asked Lin Feng, "I want to ask that woman just now. She doesn't seem human." Yuan Tianqing, Lin Feng, Xiao Yunlong and Meng Yu were all taken aback. Yuan Tianqing and the others knew about it. Meng Yu was caught off guard. She looked at Wu Chengyue in surprise. Although she thought about the female zombie, she didn't expect Wu Chengyue to say it in front of 2 outsiders. Seeing Lin Feng and the others stunned, Wu Chengyue smiled and said, "No wonder she always wears sunglasses and her voice is hoarse. At that time I felt that apart from her zombie appearance she didn't look like a zombie at all. I didn't expect her to be able to speak now. It's only been 2 months and she's evolved so fast. Lin Feng and Yuan Tianqing were also surprised at this time. Hey, have you seen her before? Xiao Yunlong also remembered the zombie and suddenly said, by the way, where's her hair? Did she cut it off? Oh, I know, it must be because she was chopped into an afro by you and thought it was ugly, so she cut it off. Hearing Xiao Yunlong's last sentence, Lin Feng and Yuan Tianqing suddenly looked at Wu Chengyue with a strange expression. Then they looked at each other with the same meaning in their eyes. There's something going on here. Wu Chengyue looked at the two curiously and said with a smile, now that you mention it, it really seems to be her. I didn't expect her to be with you now. Aren't you afraid? Lin Feng shook his head and said it was a little scary at first, but she saved every one of us. Therefore, when their savior is a zombie, they will not be able to escape. It feels strange, but the fear gradually disappeared. Because I believe she won't hurt us, so I'm not afraid. But she's really strong. I think the few of us are stronger than her. Except for you, none of us are her opponent. Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, finally glancing at Wu Chengyue, indicating that he should be the one to beat. Xiao Yunlong suddenly said at this time he lost. After that, he silently looked at Wu Chengyue. The last time they fought without using their abilities, this guy didn't even manage to take off the other's hat, but was instead taken off by the other party. And he didn't have the grace to bite the other's thigh. Wu Chengyue, who was inexplicably despised. Huh. Lin Feng and Yuan Tianqing didn't react for a while. Chapter 314. On the other side, after Lin Xiao left Wu Chengyue's house, she climbed onto a tree outside and jumped out. She stepped on the electric poles and treetops of other buildings and headed in the direction where Lin Fengji came from. She stopped when she reached the building in Area D. Then she jumped down from the building. At this time, in an alley not far from the building, someone was being besieged. Chan Yuding, a deputy captain, and several other members were blocked by another group of people in the alley. The people blocking Chan Yuding were actually a deputy captain and his subordinates. This deputy captain was the one who had talked to Tang He before, Yang Chao's right-hand man. He was leaning on the side, standing in a clean position and smoking a cigarette. He was wearing sunglasses and didn't look at Chan Yuding and the others inside. Chan Yuding and the others looked at each other. There was anger, grievance, and fear on their faces. He said, Lu Ting was bitten to death by zombies. I already said not to let that woman go out. Now that she's dead, how can you blame us for not protecting her? Besides, life or death is up to fate outside the base. What can we do now that she's dead? If you didn't want her to die, you shouldn't have let her go out with the team. This deputy captain was called Pu Luotsang. He turned to face Chan Yuding and the others. He put the cigarette in his mouth, took a drag and took out the cigarette between his fingers. Then the smoke that he had inhaled gushed out of his mouth and nose again. He said calmly, don't find so many excuses. You should know that she's a space ability user. You should know how rare space ability users are. Also, why did Lu Ting and her brother die? What's going on? He's a level 6 water ability user. If he didn't encounter a level 6 or 7 zombie king, how could he not have a chance to escape? He put the cigarette in his mouth again, took a drag and then blew it out. Do you think it's so easy to encounter level 6 or 7 zombies? Do you think it's that easy to meet level 6 or 7 zombies? And do you think I'm a fool? If you encountered them, how could only a few of them die? You didn't even have a chance to return to the base, and you're still standing here talking to me like this? No, it's not like this. Because there are robbers. Very powerful post-apocalyptic bandits. Hearing that Pu Rukang did not believe them, the deputy captain behind Chan Yuding said anxiously. Pu Xuetsong paused for a moment. Then, he suddenly turned his head and looked at them with a smile. Oh, did they encounter robbers? Then tell us, who are the robbers? What rank of arcana is it? Chan Yuding stared at him and said firmly, yes, we met robbers. Moreover, Lu Ting and 2 young men in our team were taken away by the robbers, and they ran towards Hangzhou. We also chased, but when we caught up with them, those robbers were killed by the zombies. In order to increase the credibility of Lu Yuding's words, the people around him nodded at the same time. Yes, that's right. When we arrived, the robbers were all dead. but their leader seemed to have escaped. Lu Ting was also killed there. No matter what, you let her die. I told you I can't let her die. Since you said she died in the hands of zombies, then I will believe you. I won't let you die, and killing is not allowed in the base. I just want an arm from each of you. Pu Xuezong put the last puff of the cigarette in his mouth and flicked the butt to the side. As soon as he finished speaking, the people around him moved. They moved towards Chan Yuding and the others. Seeing 7 or 8 level 4 and level 5 arcanists walking towards them, Chan Yuding and the others panicked. They immediately put on a defensive posture. They only had 1 level 6 and 1 level 5, and the others were all level 3. Even if Chan Yuding could deal with Pu Xuezong, the others were no match for Pu Xuezong's men. Lin Xiao looked at Chan Yuding strangely. She clearly killed Lu Ting herself. Why did she lie? Moreover, the bespectacled man was so domineering, as if no one cared about him when he said that he wanted someone's arm. It seemed that this person's position in the base was not low, and he was also a level 6 arcanist. Deputy Leader Pu, if you really want to fight, then I will accompany you. But if you use Lu Ting's death as a reason to deal with us, I will not accept it. Pu Xuezong sneered and said, even if you are right, so what? Lu Ting is also my woman. I haven't played enough with her, and you let her die. Are you going to compensate me with such a beautiful woman? After saying that, he suddenly waved his hand, and a flame burst out from the heads of Chan Yuding and the others, then quickly expanded and pressed down. The extremely high temperature immediately made Chan Yuding and the others feel like their hair was about to burn. Chan Yuding reacted quickly and raised his hand. A layer of cement and soil suddenly extended from the surrounding walls, and then covered the top of their heads, isolating the flame above. The flame did not disappear when it hit the layer of cement and soil. Instead, it surged down into the gap next to it. Pu Xuezong's men did not follow suit, but stood to the side and watched. Seeing the fire pit drilling down, the extremely high temperature caused the surrounding air to burn up. Chan Yuding's team members with lower-level arcanists immediately felt it difficult to breathe, as if they were about to suffocate. Moreover, they were surrounded by walls, and they did not have time to escape. They were already dizzy from the suffocation. The attack of a level 6 arcanist was not something that level 2 or 3 arcanists like them could withstand. Pu Xuezong's flame was not only hot, but it also carried fire poison. So even if Chan Yuding used his earth ability to block the direct attack of the flame in time, the fire poison still filled the air. Chan Yuding raised his hands, and the cement on the ground split open. A mud wall rose from the ground and quickly blocked the surrounding gap, preventing the flame from invading. At the same time, the ground under their feet began to sink. When it reached a height of 2 meters, he created a passage on the ground next to them. Go into the cave quickly. The deputy captain, who was in a better state, immediately helped the weakest one up and walked into his passage. The other 2 also struggled to get up and walked in with their hands on the mud wall. Do you think you can leave by going underground? At that moment, Pu Xuezong said coldly and said to the person next to him, release the snake. Then, one of them suddenly raised his leg and kicked the mud wall that Chan Yuding had created with all his might. Bang! The mud wall was more than 10 centimeters thick. However, it was still easily kicked out by this person. Then, another person waved his hand, and a snake as thick as a finger slid out from his hand. When it fell to the ground, it quickly split into countless snakes, all of them crawling toward the hole. As the snakes crawled, they grew in size and split again. Chapter 3:15. However, Chan Yuding quickly blocked the hole created by Pu Croang's attack. Then, his skin quickly turned into a layer of dry stone skin in the dark, and a stone wall immediately grew to block the hole. The black snakes that Pu Rukang's men released were immediately trapped around Chan Yuding. Chan Yuding was also a level 6 ability user, so Pu Rukang couldn't do anything to him. Seeing that Chan Yuding was holding on to protect the others, Pu Rukang couldn't do anything to him. After a while, he would also dive into the ground and leave. However, Pu Rukang didn't seem to care at all. He suddenly reached out and retracted the flames, then said indifferently, Chan Yuding, you can escape this time. But let me tell you, you will come find me again. When the time comes, you will give me your arm. After saying that, he turned around and waved to his men. Then he led them out of the alley. Lin Xiao, who was hanging on the wall, saw Pu Rukang's confident expression. She felt that this man must have something else to say. She looked at Chen Yuding's position and saw that the earth wall around Chen Yuding was slowly retreating. Then, a man who looked like a stone statue was revealed. Who else could it be but Chen Yuding? Soon Chen Yuding's stone skin returned to normal skin. Then the ground not far ahead suddenly cracked open, and the deputy captain of the Wind Court team and 3 other team members rose from the ground. However, only the deputy captain was awake. The others were already lying on the ground, unconscious. "Captain, they have been poisoned by fire," the deputy captain said to Chen Yuding anxiously. Chen Yuding immediately ran over and helped the 3 of them up. "Send them to the hospital first." Lin Xiao looked at them, then thought for a moment before turning around and leaving. Half an hour later, Pu Rukang and the others arrived at a place that looked like a refugee area in Area F. The houses here were all 1-story or 2-story houses, and the doors and windows were all broken. Many of the windows were even sealed with wooden boards or strips to prevent the wind from entering at night. It was very shabby and simple. There were many people here, but most of them looked shabby or dirty. Their hair was unkempt, and their faces were sallow and thin. Because they were all civilians, they did not have any special abilities. Looking into those houses from the outside, most of them had no furniture, only 1 or 2 beds or mattresses on the floor. When Pu Rukang walked past with his men, the people who were sitting at the door or leaning against the wall were stunned. They were all clean and armed with pistols or rifles. They all quietened down and silently watched the group of people walk past with their heads held high. They could tell that these people were either from the inner district or the middle district. He couldn't afford to offend them. If he did, he might not even know how he died. Moreover, no one would come to investigate. After walking for about 20 minutes, Pu Xuezong and his men stopped in front of a row of 2-story buildings. They entered the stairway and ascended. The staircase was dark and dirty. Both sides were littered with trash, sand and rocks. Only the small path in front of him was clean. What's more, it was trampled on by someone from downstairs. After going to the corridor on the 2nd floor, he saw 2 or 3 men standing in front of a room. When they saw Pu Qiakang and the others coming up, they immediately greeted them respectfully. "Deputy Chief." Pu Xuezong took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. He took out a cigarette and walked to the door of the room. After standing still, he put the cigarette in his mouth. Someone next to him immediately took out a lighter and lit it for him. After taking a puff, he exhaled the smoke and asked, "Did you bring her?" The 3 men who were originally guarding the door immediately smiled and said, "Yes, we did. It was a bit difficult to go to Chen Yuding's house to catch her. But that woman came out on her own and seemed to be going to the trading market. That's why we caught him on the way. We knocked out the 2 men who followed her and threw them to a deserted place." Pu Xuezong nodded and said, "Yes. Open the door. You didn't touch her, did you?" The 3 men at the door shook their heads and said, "We wouldn't dare. Deputy Chief, you said that you can play first. How could we dare to go first? But this woman's figure is really good." As they spoke, they all showed covetous eyes and helped open the door. Pu Xuezong said with a smile, "That's good. Don't worry. When I'm done playing, there will be a share for you. But when you play, take it easy. Don't play her to death too quickly. This woman is enough for you to play for a long time." The people behind him all revealed excited expressions as they watched him walk in alone. Pu Xuezong directly closed the door as soon as he went in. This Pu Xuezong actually caught someone of Chen Yuding's. Judging from his previous conversation with Chen Yuding, it seemed that he just wanted to find an excuse to deal with Chen Yuding. And Lu Ting was probably one of the women he played with. It didn't matter to him whether she was dead or not. The room was very dark. It was a single room, the kind that didn't even have a bathroom. There was only a window in the back, but it was also sealed. It was also empty inside. There was only a bed with a shabby quilt on it. A woman was sitting in the corner of the bed with her hands and feet tied. Her mouth was also sealed. She saw the door open and a strange man come in. The woman immediately looked at him in horror, and couldn't help but shrink back. Ugh, ugh, ugh. She shook her head randomly. Her eyes were full of fear and panic. She had heard the conversation at the door just now. She knew what this man was going to do to her after coming in. Pu Xuetsong stood at the door, smoking while the light came in through the gap in the window. He looked at the woman on the bed. This woman wasn't beautiful. Her facial features weren't delicate enough, but they were still decent. Her legs, which were shrunk in front of her, were very long. Pu Xuetsong put the cigarette in his mouth and walked to the side of the bed. Ugh! The woman immediately shook her head in fear and shrank back. She wanted to shrink into the wall behind her 10,000 times. But soon, the man bent down to grab her foot and dragged her out forcefully. Ugh! The woman was so scared by the hand on her foot that tears came out. Her scream was sealed in her mouth. Hey, this foot is really thin. Do you think it will break if I squeeze it hard? Pu Xuetsong grabbed her foot and dragged it out, asking curiously. The woman struggled hard, trying to pull her foot out of his hand. But in Pu Xuetsong's eyes, her strength was nothing. He grabbed the woman's foot and took the cigarette out from the corner of his mouth with the other hand. Then he dragged the woman under his body, bent down, and blew a mouthful of smoke at her frightened and desperate face. Chapter 316. Pu Xuetsong dragged the woman in front of him, bent over and blew a puff of smoke at her. He threw the head aside, reached out his hand, grabbed the woman's collar and pulled it down. The woman struggled with all her might, kicking her tied legs like a fish. She wanted to get out of the man's control. Pu Xuetsong grabbed her clothes and tore them with great force. Rip! The clothes were soon torn into pieces. The man enjoyed the feeling of tearing the woman's clothes. The woman's face was covered with tears of despair, and she let out muffled moans from her sealed mouth. Pu Xuetsong's hands grasped the 2 lumps of white, indescribable, flesh in front of her. A soft and elastic sensation came from his palm, which was a wonderful and exciting feeling. Pu Xuetsong supported the woman's neck with one hand. Seeing the woman's expression, he suddenly lifted the hand beside her neck and tore off the tape on her mouth. No. No, please let me go. As soon as the tape on her mouth was released, the woman immediately cried loudly and shrilly. While screaming, she struggled with all her might, trying to get away from this man. Pu Xuetsong said to her with a lustful expression, "Scream, scream, I love to rape women. Only women who know how to resist have feelings." Hee. With that, he lowered his body, pressing heavily on the woman. "Don't know, stop. Stop, help someone help me." At this moment, Pu Xuetsong lowered his head, and with a thick stench of cigarette smoke, he hurriedly sealed the woman's mouth. At the same time, his 2 hands began to work non-stop. The woman only felt a disgusting stench of cigarette smoke rushing into her mouth, and then a slippery tongue rushed through her teeth and stirred into her mouth. At this moment, several people at the door squeezed to the door and put their ears against the door to listen to the sound inside. All of them had an excited expression on their faces. Wow, so intense. This woman's moans are so emotional. Listen, the sound is blocked. The deputy leader must have kissed her. Whether it was the humiliation inside the room or the eavesdropping outside the door, no one could see this floor now. Even if someone passed by downstairs and heard the woman's cries, they would not be able to hear it. He wouldn't poke his nose into other people's business. He would just pretend that he didn't hear anything, or that nothing had happened and continue on his own path. On the other hand, when Lin Xiao arrived at Lin Feng's residence, she didn't go upstairs. Instead, he climbed through the window, because there was someone guarding the door. After identifying the window of Lin Feng's room, Lin Xiao climbed up in no time. When she reached the top, she sneaked in through the glass window. Mrs. Lin and others are sitting on the sofa in the living room, chatting. Do you guys think it's possible that Lin Feng ate at Leader Wu's place before coming back? It's been half an hour. Cheng Wangxue sat on the sofa and hugged Lin Xiaolu. Mrs. Lin leans against the sofa and crosses her arms in front of her chest. He shook his head and said, "I think so." He called Lin Feng away at this time. "We definitely have to eat, but we might talk about some things during the meal." Lin Wenwen combed his long hair and asked, "What do you want to talk about? Is it about Miss Lu?" Mrs. Lin nodded and said, "I think so. Otherwise, why would we talk about anything else? Besides, Leader Wu hasn't found his daughter yet. Will he still be in the mood to talk about other things?" The others nodded. Lin Xiao walked to an empty chair and sat down. She also nodded. She is still invisible, so no one else can see her. At this time Lin Wenwen looked at his watch and said, "By the way, it's almost time to go to the task bureau. I wonder if anyone is willing to come today." Saying this, she stands up. As soon as she moves, Lin Hao and Long Qingying move as well. The three of them walk towards the door. Mrs. Lin and Cheng Wangxue, as well as Lu Junjie and the others who are in this room, follow them out. They are Xing Lu and Wei Jingchen. Lin Xiao immediately stands up and follows them out. As soon as they come out, Lin Wenwen runs to the opposite room and knocks on the door. It's time to go to the task bureau. After a while, someone from inside comes to open the door. Du Yuanqing and Li Zheng walk out. "I'm waiting for you." Lin Wenwen turns around and leaves, not looking at the soldiers standing motionless by the door. She says, "Let's go. I want to go to the trading area in the afternoon to see if there is anything I can hand over." Lin Hao looks at her strangely. "You're still going? You went yesterday, the day before that, and the day before that. Have you exchanged everything that needs to be exchanged?" The trading area is actually a place where people take out things that can still be used to exchange for food or other necessities. But many people only want food. Of course, the corpse core can also be exchanged, just like a street stall. In the first 2 days, Lin Wenwen has dragged Long Qingying there several times. She had thought that she would have exchanged enough things since she had been gone for 3 days. Lin Wenwen rolls her eyes at him and says, "What do you know, it's just like Taobao. Maybe I missed something before." A woman's desire to shop is something that most men will not understand. Lin Hao and the other men just looked at her with a baffled expression. Then they go down the stairs. The soldiers at the door don't affect their movements, but 2 of them follow them down. Not long after they walked out of the community, Xiao Yunlong sent Lin Feng and Long Qingying back. At the same time when he left, he suddenly took the soldiers with him. When Lin Wenwen and the others went to the announcement office, the place where they receive applicants was already filled with people waiting. Although not many, there are still a few. In fact, there is a large electronic announcement screen in the hall, on which there are tasks displayed. But many people will also put up a table in the empty space next to it. Then they will put up an announcement to assign tasks or recruit people. Lin Wenwen and the others walked to the front of their table, and saw a few men dressed in very simple clothes standing there somewhat cautiously. After seeing Lin Wenwen and the others come, they all looked at Lin Wenwen and the others timidly. "Then you push me, I push you, but no one dares to come forward to ask questions." "Ah, you are here to look for a job? Are there any skills and requirements?" Lin Wenwen came forward with a smile and said to them. At this time, the one in front was pushed out by his companions. He looked back at the others in a panic. Then when he saw everyone nodding to him, he turned back to look at Lin Wenwen. "We want to ask ordinary people can do it?" The man asked with some stuttering. Lin Wenwen and the others knew that they were ordinary people. If they were paranormals, they would not have this kind of shrinking posture, nor would they wear old clothes that have not been washed for a long time. He was standing here with a sour stench. Because of their existence, the surrounding paranormals intentionally or unintentionally stayed away from them. Chapter 317. However, Lin Wenwen did not show a disgusted expression. Instead, he smiled and said, "Do you have the strength? Can you carry bricks?" Hearing this question, the men immediately nodded. Lin Wenwen smiled and said, "As long as you have the strength. We're only recruiting people to build walls. We don't necessarily need people with special abilities. But there's one more thing, and that's whether or not you dare to follow us. Don't worry, at least I won't harm you." However, after hearing Lin Wenwen's words, the men hesitated for a while. "Excuse me, is there anything to eat? We don't ask for much. We just want to have a full meal every day." They had been hungry for many days and had nothing to eat, because half a month ago, their original job at the farm in Zone C was squeezed out. After they got in through their connections, they lost their jobs. They were just ordinary people without special abilities. He didn't know any martial arts, so he wasn't agile enough. No corpse hunting squad would be willing to accept these ordinary people, so even if they left the base to mingle outside, they wouldn't be able to survive. It wouldn't be long before he would die under the bite of the zombies. Lin Wenwen raised his head and glanced at the others. At this time Du Yuanqing said, "Oh, that's for sure. If you dare to come with us, not only will you be able to eat every day, but you will also be able to eat every day. Moreover, it will be the normal 3 meals. If you perform well, they will even give you some rice, flour, and noodles. The few men widened their eyes and looked at Du Yuanxing in disbelief. She then looked at Lin Wenwen and asked, Really? Can you get rice and noodles? Lin Wenwen nodded and said, That's right. But we can't tell you the location now. You'll know when we get there. Let me ask you now, do you dare? The men looked at each other. He was a little hesitant. At this time, some people who had been watching from the side interrupted. You don't even let us know the location. 3 meals a day with rice and noodles? Are you sure you're telling the truth? Even you don't believe it, do you? Ha ha ha. That's right. I've been observing this mission for a long time. The conditions you offer seem very attractive, but do you really have rice and noodles for these people who are going with you? Furthermore, you only said that you were going to carry bricks. He didn't say what kind of bricks he was carrying or where he was going to do it. It's just a way to fool these honest people who don't have food to eat. That's right. Do you think there's rice in face? Would it be difficult to take it out for everyone to see? Only then will they believe your words, right? I just want to know, who are you people? Where did so much precious food come from? Apart from the high-ranking officials in the inner district, who else would have so much rice to give to others? You probably don't even have enough for yourself. I think it's true that they were carrying bricks, but whether or not there was food, whether or not it was rice, we still need to verify it. The surroundings were filled with doubtful voices. Most of the people were stirring up trouble here. When he spoke, he pretended to be loud. Hearing these people's words, the surrounding people all looked over. Their eyes were filled with the expression of watching a good show. Lin Wenwen and the others only glanced at those people indifferently. Du Yuanxing's temper was a bit more jumpy, and he couldn't help but angrily say to those people who were making sarcastic remarks, What nonsense are you spouting? It's up to you whether you believe it or not, but don't talk like we're all liars, okay? Lin Hao coldly said, People like you, even if you wanted to come, we wouldn't want them. Those people just disdainfully smiled and said, you speak as if it's true. Come, look, they're not even willing to invite us. What a joke, it's as if we want to go. Ha ha ha, it's true. Hee. Mocking laughter came from the surroundings. The few people who were talking to Lin Wenwen earlier at this moment also somewhat retreated. That we'd better find something else to look at. I'll listen to you. Only the man who was pushed out to talk to Lin Wenwen at the beginning was not affected by the surrounding people. He shook his head and said, No, I believe it's true. Hey, don't be silly. What if? The people behind him saw that he actually wanted to follow, and anxiously pulled him. Just as he was about to say something, he glanced at Lin Wenwen and suddenly stopped. At this moment, Lin Wenwen just smiled faintly, shook his head and said, Are you retarded? Or are you really stupid? What do you think this place is? Is it a street stall outside? Isn't this your appointments bureau? Haven't the rewards and components of every mission been verified? Or is it that your staff or person in charge here, knowing that we are liars, still let us in to swindle and swindle? Or do you think that the staff here are all trash? Don't know anything? These words of hers successfully shut up the people around her who were making trouble. The originally complacent mocking also froze on her face. Yes, that's right. This was the mechanism structure of the entire base. In other words, the staff here were the subordinates of the leader's subordinates. Therefore, doubting the staff here was equivalent to doubting the leader's subordinates. Doubting his subordinates, wasn't that also doubting the leader? This pot was a bit big. Just now, those people just said a bunch of nonsense for a moment's pleasure. But they didn't expect that this beautiful young woman's mouth was even fiercer than her appearance. This is not what we said. This is what you said. Those who had been complacent just now immediately shrank back. On the other hand, some people who were standing quietly by the side to watch the show cursed a few idiots. Of course, they were cursing those who were making trouble blindly. Get lost. Lin Hao glared at them coldly. He said, I'll remember all of you. We won't recruit people like you in the future. At this time, Lin Wenwen said to the few ordinary people who wanted to go with them, This is all up to you. We won't force you. If you are willing, you can sign the information here. As she spoke, she pointed to a stack of forms on the recruitment counter. Those men looked at each other again. And it was still the man who refused to back down who said, "I'll go first." As he spoke, he walked over, picked up a pen on the table and began to write. The others were stunned when they saw that he didn't hesitate at all. Then they slowly followed him and waited for him to finish writing before it was their turn. Can I ask you something? When can we set off?" After the man finished writing, he let the others fill in the form. At the same time, they couldn't help but ask Lin Wenwen. Lin Wenwen said, "It depends. We need to recruit enough people we want." The man asked, "When will that be? Are you going to recruit a lot of people?" Lin Wenwen said with a faint smile, "We originally planned to recruit 100 people first, but now the situation is like this. We don't know how long it will take to recruit 100 people. Including the 5 people here, there are a total of 40 or 50 people now. So we decided to wait until there are 100 people and then leave first. We'll send the first batch of people first and then come back to recruit more people." Chapter 318. At this time, the others behind the man suddenly asked, "Can we come back whenever we want?" Lin Wenwen nodded with a faint smile. "Sure. Yes, but we need to ask for leave." The man looked at Lin Wenwen hesitantly, wanting to say something but hesitating. Lin Wenwen asked him, "Do you have any other questions?" The man said with an embarrassed expression, "Can we leave earlier? Because we need food." Lin Wenwen was stunned, then turned to look at the others. Du Yuanqing said, "But we only have 50 people now, it's a bit too few. It's not easy to travel on the road, it'll take 5 or 6 hours to go back and forth. It's a waste of fuel." Lin Hao, Lin Wenwen and the others all nodded. They couldn't give food to these people first, so they could only wait. At this time Lin Wenwen said, "How about this, you can go back and see if anyone is willing to come with you. You can find someone to exchange for half a jean of flour, white flour. How about it?" As soon as she said this, the 5 men's expressions brightened. Their eyes lit up. Really? Lin Wenwen still smiled and nodded. Most of the paranormals were watching from the side, looking doubtful. After getting Lin Wenwen's affirmation, the men who filled out the form left excitedly. Obviously, they wanted to find someone. Lin Wenwen and the others stayed in the mission bureau for another 2 hours, except for the few ordinary people from before. Except for those ordinary people, no one else came. Some just passed by and looked at the information on their bulletin board, then left doubtfully. On the other side, not long after Lin Feng and Du Yuanqing left, someone came to Wu Chengyue's house. "Leader, Chen Yuding is looking for you." Xiao Liqing came in and reported to him. Wu Chengyue sat on the sofa reading some information. On the sofa next to him, Meng Yu was holding Wu Yueling and helping her comb her hair. Wu Yueling was holding the gray rabbit in her arms, feeding it a green vegetable leaf in her hand. But the gray furry ball didn't give her face and refused to eat. "Invite him in." In fact, the reason why he was so sure that Wu Yueling wasn't taken away by bad people was because he learned about Lin Feng's team from Chen Yuding, and the woman with sunglasses who disappeared as soon as they entered the base. After a while, Chen Yuding walked in alone. Wu Chengyue looked up at him and asked in surprise, "Why are you alone?" As he spoke, he pointed at the single sofa next to him. Chen Yuding walked to the sofa he pointed at and sat down. Then he said, "I ran into Piao Chotsong on the way here, and we fought. A few of my team members were poisoned by his fire poison, so I went to the hospital first." Wu Chengyue picked up an empty cup on the table to pour water for him. He frowned when he heard this. He turned his head and looked at him. "Pu Xuetsong? How did you end up fighting him?" Chen Yuding pondered for a while and said, "They probably found out about our relationship a long time ago. They'll come looking for trouble over some trivial matters." Wu Chengyue nodded and pushed the cup to him. "Yes, I remember that there's a woman in your team who's very close to him. But this time you let her die outside. He can indeed use this as an excuse." Chen Yuding nodded knowingly and said, "I've long expected this. However, that woman could have come safely, but she courted death herself. She can't blame others." As he spoke, he looked at Wu Yueling and asked, "Did that woman with sunglasses return Miss Lingling?" Wu Chengyue turned his head to look at Lingling and said with a smile, "Yes, she suddenly appeared at my house at noon. She returned Lingling to me." Chen Yuding said, We didn't see her when we entered the base that day, so we thought she didn't come in. We didn't expect her to avoid the inspection at the gate and sneak in. But why didn't she come in with Lin Feng and the others? He didn't know that Wu Yueling was taken away by that woman because she had awakened her special ability. But he also knew that the woman had something to do to take Wu Yueling away. 2 days ago, Wu Changyue suddenly came to the base and asked him if he had seen a woman wearing a hat and sunglasses, with very short hair and a big chest come in with him. In the end, such a woman did come back with them, but she didn't enter the base. After hearing that he wanted to cooperate with that woman, he asked him to tell him the details about that woman. Later, he learned that their leader's little princess had been taken away again. But this time it seemed that the other party didn't harm the little princess. Because after hearing his description of that strange woman, he seemed to be relieved. Wu Changyue and Meng Yu looked at him curiously and asked, "Hey? Hearing what you said, that woman must have done something she shouldn't have, right?" Chun Yuding nodded and said, "The car we drove back to the base was borrowed by Miss Lu, the woman in sunglasses. As a result, Lu Ting became greedy in the middle of the night and asked a member of our team with psychedelic abilities to help her put us all to sleep. They wanted to secretly drive the car away, but they were killed by Miss Lu and her brother Lu Chongfeng." Wu Changyue said clearly, "The Miss Lu you are talking about, she is not a person to be trifled with. I also advise you not to provoke her, otherwise don't blame me for not being able to help you." Chun Yuding nodded repeatedly. Although he had only been with her for a day or two, her momentum was too strong. Moreover, her methods were decisive and neat. She was a dangerous person. Besides, he didn't know her strength. He asked Wu Changyue curiously and said, "Leader, you seem to be very familiar with Miss Lu. How did you know each other? Why did she secretly take Ling Ling away and not inform you?" Wu Changyue thought of the first time he met that female zombie. Because he was quick enough, he used a grenade to strike her. As a result, she got angry and ran far away with her daughter. He had to chase her for a long time. The second time they met, nothing happened, and she even returned Ling Ling to him intact. It just let him know one thing, that the zombies in this world, not all had lost their humanity and rationality. Thinking about the last time he saw her, she had changed too much, so he didn't recognize her. As a result, without using his ability, he couldn't even beat her with his hands, and he even bit her. Thinking about that position, thinking of this, Wu Changyue couldn't help but cover his forehead, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He covered his forehead, waved his hand, and said to Chun Yuding, "Oh no, she still left me a note. It was just that I was too anxious at the time, so I didn't think about it. Besides, I'm not very familiar with her, we just met a few times." Chun Yuding nodded his head. Then he said, "That's right, our hunting team is going to carry bricks with them this time. Leader, don't you think you should transfer some people to go with them? I observed them and found that they really look like they have enough food. And the conditions they gave are not bad. Although I don't know where they got so much food." Wu Changyue nodded his head, then picked up the 2 documents he was looking at and handed them to him. He said, "You should know that they are originally from Hades base, and their work in the mission office is real. But the food you mentioned, it's Miss Lu who is in charge. She has a way to get a lot of food. These are the people I'm going to lend them, and it's almost winter. They also need to store more food, or else they won't have much harvest when the weather gets cold. A lot of ordinary people in the civilian area will starve to death." Chun Yuding took the paper in his hand, looked at him with surprise and said, "Where did she get a lot of food?" Wu Changyue said with a smile, "She can go to the zombie city to collect food. And doesn't she have the space? Even I don't dare to go to the downtown area of Hangzhou, so it's not a problem for her to go there. And she should have been an elite soldier in the special forces, so she should have a lot of military knowledge. She should know where to find the place where the government stores food. And this time their purpose in coming to our base is to recruit a lot of people to build a new base. Although I don't know where they want to build the base, it should be near us." Chun Yuding was surprised, and his eyes slightly widened. He asked, "Base? They want to build a base? Just a few people? No wonder they want us to be construction workers. It seems that they want to build a wall, right?" Wu Changyue said, "Yes, I thought their leaders were Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng. Looking at it now, it seems that this Miss Lu has more authority than these 2. Chun Yuding nodded in agreement, "Yes. But this Miss Lu is a strange person. I don't see her all day. Wu Chonghua pointed at the 2 papers in his hand and said, just in time. If you go, you can lead the team and take care of them. Chun Yuding looked at the list in his hand. The names, abilities, levels, genders, addresses, and other information of the 300 people were clearly listed. He looked at the number of ability users and asked in surprise, you're sending so many ability users? Aren't you going to go out of the base to collect supplies? Wu Chonghua nodded and said, well, I don't need so many people here. In fact, I just want to make things convenient for them. After all, Miss Lu did help me a lot this time. Then he turned his head and looked at Lingling. Chun Yuding looked at his movements and understood. He said, then I'll tell them about it in the afternoon. Wu Chonghua nodded. Then he stood up and said, let's go together. I'm going to the agency building in Area D. Then he walked over to Wu Yueling. Then bent down to pick her up and said, Lingling, let's go out for a walk. Meng Yu held the gray rabbit that jumped out of Wu Yueling's arms. Wu Yueling hugged his neck and just looked at him. There was no reaction. Then they walked out of the house. Chapter 319. In the afternoon, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying left Lin Hao and Du Yuanxing at the appointment bureau and went to the trading office. Each district had its own trading office. Of course, if one felt that it was not enough, they could go to other districts. The agency building was located in some commercial buildings, and the mission bureau was on one of the floors of the agency building. The security guards, other offices, and so on were all in the agency building. Of course, the trading hall was also in the agency building, and it was on the first, second, and third floors. Because there were too many people in the base, and they were densely packed. In order to make more space for people to live in, the factories and commercial streets were all occupied. Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying went down to the trading area on the first floor, and saw that many people had a lot of things that needed to be exchanged. From furniture to daily necessities. These were all practical things and they sold well. There were also some jewelry, clothes, shoes, bedding, and so on. Many of these things were collected by the mutant teams outside the base, risking their lives to collect them. If they were not willing to hand over the things they collected back to the base, you can carry out the transaction here. Girls only looked at clothes, pants, shoes, and so on, as well as ornaments. Ornaments like jewelry were usually traded by fewer people. Therefore, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying were watching from the clothing and shoes areas. There were both old and new items, and the prices were different depending on how old they were. Of course, the new ones were very expensive and the older ones were, the cheaper they were. Lin Wenwen and the 2 women were followed by 2 or 3 men in camouflage military uniforms with guns in their hands. Therefore, although the 2 of them were beautiful, most people were very polite to them. But some people were not so sure. This pair of shoes is the right size for me. I want this pair. When they reached the second floor, Lin Wenwen stood in front of a stall and pointed at a pair of canvas shoes on the table. The stall owner was a man who looked to be in his 30s. He originally looked very lazy as he sat on a chair in front of the stall. However, when he saw the 2 young women standing in front of his stall, his gaze changed. Especially since Lin Wenwen was very good-looking and had a quiet temperament. He immediately stood up and looked at Lin Wenwen's young face with an infatuated look in his eyes. With a hint of evil in his eyes, he laughed and said, "Oh beauty, you're so beautiful. Do you have a boyfriend?" The moment the other party opened his mouth, he rudely asked if he had a boyfriend. Lin Wenwen's originally faint smile disappeared. She glanced at the man expressionlessly. The man's gaze made her very uncomfortable. Therefore, the idea of exchanging the shoes immediately disappeared. "Qing, let's go to other places to take a look." She turned around and was about to leave with Long Qingying. "Hey, don't go yet, let's chat a little longer." "What does it matter?" As soon as the man in the stall saw that Lin Wenwen and Su Xiaoxue were about to leave, he immediately appeared in front of them and stretched out his hand to block their path. "Get out of my way," Long Qingying said coldly. The man looked at Long Qingying from head to toe, shook his head and said with a disgusted look, "Just ask, your body is not bad, but your face is too stinky. You're not even good looking, so why are you pretending to be so virtuous? No matter how virtuous you are, you still have to cry under a man's body." Lin Wenwen frowned slightly. Long Qingying raised her hand and pulled out half of the katana tied to her back. A cold intent pounced on the man. The man took 2 steps back in surprise, but he didn't look panicked. Instead, he said with surprise, "Io, don't pull out your katana so easily. Okay? You're not allowed to kill people in the base, you have to know this." Seeing that he took 2 steps back, Lin Wonwon immediately raised her foot and prepared to walk around him. "Hey beauty. Don't go. You have to know that I've already taken a fancy to you. You have to tell me if you have a man now. If you do, then hurry up and dump him." The man immediately strode over and continued to block Lin Wonwon. At this moment, Wei Jingchen, who had been following behind Lin Wonwon, saw this and immediately went up to block the man. "Sorry, please move aside." Wei Jingchen was tall and burly, giving ordinary people a sense of oppression. However, the man didn't care. He slightly raised his chin and said disdainfully, "What? Ordinary people? Do you think you're amazing just because you're tall? Do you think I'm afraid of you just because you have a gun?" As he spoke, he suddenly raised his hand to push Wei Jingchen. Wei Jingchen's body swayed and he dodged the man's outstretched hand. Then in the instant he dodged, he nimbly raised his gun and aimed it at the man, quickly loading it. Lin Wonwon didn't want to cause trouble. She took a step back and turned to walk back. At worst, she could just circle around him from another direction. The man saw that Lin Wonwon was about to turn and leave because of Wei Jingchen's interference. A sharp glint flashed through his eyes. He suddenly reached out, his movement several times faster than Wei Jingchen's. He grabbed Wei Jingchen's gun and forcefully twisted it before Wei Jingchen could react. Then he twisted the gun out of Wei Jingchen's hands and it fell to the ground with a clatter. Then Wei Jingchen's gun left his hand and he panicked a little. The man's body flashed, and he spun and kicked Wei Jingchen in the stomach. Bam! The 1.9-meter-tall man flew 3 to 4 meters away and crashed into a pillar at the side. This scene happened so quickly that no one could react. Wei Jingchen was easily sent flying by Lu Shang's kick. The people around them didn't say anything. They just quietly watched from afar. Long Qingying immediately pulled out her knife. So, after the man kicked Wei Jingchen away, he stood still and turned around. Then a sharp knife was pointed at his throat. He didn't move, but his expression was relaxed. He smiled. "Io, do you dare to cut my neck? Do you know who I am? If you dare hurt a hair on my head, I'm telling you, you won't live for more than a few days." Long Qingying narrowed her eyes and was about to move. Suddenly, her hand was quickly grabbed by a hand next to her, preventing her from stabbing the man who looked like a scumbag at first glance. Lin Wonwon grabbed her. "Qingqing, don't be rash." The man smiled at Lin Wonwon. Aya, I won't ask you if you have a man. How about this, you sleep with me tonight and I'll give you this pair of shoes for free. I'll even give you a set of clothes. You can pick any set here." Lin Wonwon didn't say anything. She directly pulled Long Qingying toward Wei Jingchen. This time the man didn't continue to hold her back. He just stared at Lin Wonwon's back with an aggressive expression. Chapter 320. How are you? Are you hurt? Lin Wonwon helped Wei Jingchen up. Long Qingying stood by her side and stared at the man. Xing Lu and the soldier who had followed them also stood in front of her. "Cough, I'm fine." Wei Jingchen stood up, clutching his chest. He coughed and shook his head. Lin Wonwon turned to the soldier who had followed them. "Do you know this man? Who is he?" This man was very arrogant. Even ordinary ability users wouldn't be so condescending. The soldier turned back to her. "He's the younger brother of leader Yang. His name is Yang Hui." The others immediately looked at him, and a hint of understanding flashed in their eyes. No wonder he dared to tease a woman in public. He had such a powerful backer. Lin Wonwon said, "Let's go. Don't cause trouble." If the other party was an ordinary person, she could have let Long Qingying fight him. But the other party was the younger brother of the leader of this base. If they fought, it would only bring more trouble later on. After all, they couldn't afford to offend the leader of this base. Just as they were about to leave, a little boy about 7 or 8 years old suddenly jumped out of nowhere. He quickly ran to Lin Wonwon's side. As he ran very fast, he just happened to run past Wei Jingchen. Wei Jingchen's chest was still throbbing from the kick just now. Thus, he didn't notice the little boy's approach. Also, because the little boy was relatively short, no one could react. The little boy ran to Lin Wenwen's side and squeezed his way through. Then he reached out to grab Lin Wenwen's skirt and forcefully lifted it up. But when he was halfway through, a hand suddenly appeared out of thin air. A hand clamped down on his wrist. Ah! Lin Wenwen, who realized that her skirt was being pulled, was also shocked and cried out involuntarily. Ah! Let go of me! Let go! But just as Lin Wenwen finished shouting, a child's voice rang out. Only then did everyone see that a child had suddenly run out to play a prank on Lin Wenwen. But halfway through a woman suddenly appeared out of nowhere and grabbed his hand. Then she stopped his prank. Lin Wenwen pressed down on her long skirt and took a few steps away from the little boy. She was already irritated by the man, and now she glared at the little boy with shame and anger. Where did this kid come from? Whose house is it? Just as she finished shouting, she saw that the crowd that had gradually gathered to watch the show had opened up a path. A woman in her 30s walked out with an arrogant look on her face, pulling a delicate little girl along with her. The woman raised her free hand and pointed at Lin Xiao, who was holding the little boy. She shouted, "Who are you? Release my Debeo." As soon as she spoke, she told everyone. The boy was her child. However, she wasn't apologizing to Lin Wenwen. Instead, she was scolding Lin Xiao, who was holding on to her son. Apologize first. Before Lin Xiao could speak, Long Qingying spoke up coldly. Whether it was the child or the adult, neither of them felt that they had done anything wrong. This made Lin Wenwen and the others even angrier. What are you apologizing for? Is my Debeo playing with you? That's because he thinks highly of you. Don't be so ungrateful. The woman just smiled indifferently. You. Lin Wenwen glared angrily, speechless from the woman's words. If Lin Xiao hadn't suddenly appeared to stop the little boy, by the time she reacted, her skirt would have been flipped up. There were so many people here, and they would all be able to see her underwear. If that was really the case, how could she face others? And now, the other person was even indulging the naughty child's prank without a trace of shame. Instead, she felt that it was only natural. Lin Xiao held on to the little boy, but she knew what he was thinking. She frowned and said to Lin Wenwen, "This child was ordered by the adult." Lin Wenwen was stunned when he heard her words. Lin Xiao looked at the woman who was still pointing at her and said, "It was that woman who told him to do this." What? Lin Wenwen's eyes widened. He looked at her in disbelief and then at the woman. "Let me go. It hurts." Woo woo. The naughty child, who had been twisting his wrist, suddenly cried and angrily shouted at Lin Xiao. Then he turned to the woman and shouted, "Mom, my hand is going to be broken by her. It hurts. You transvestite, let go of my son, do you hear me?" The woman saw that her son looked like he was in pain and became anxious. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Okay." Then, she suddenly lifted her hand and threw him with force. The naughty child was thrown out of the window more than 10 meters away. Debeo! She didn't think that Lin Xiao would dare to throw the child out of the window. The woman was scared out of her wits. She let go of the little girl and rushed toward the window. This was the second floor. If a child was thrown by Lin Xiao like that, he would either be dead or crippled. Everyone was so shocked by her actions that they couldn't react at all. Moreover, the window was very far from here. How did this woman with sunglasses do it? The moment the naughty child was thrown out, Lin Xiao also moved. She instantly flashed to the window and reached out her hand. At the same time, she grabbed the naughty child's collar. Then, the naughty child was lifted out of the window by her hand. "Ah wah 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 wah. Mom! Uncle! Hurry and save me!" The naughty child immediately cried out in fear. He hung outside the window and didn't dare to move. "Debeo!" The woman screamed and ran over. At the same time, the man who teased Lin Wenwen just now also rushed over. "Don't move. If you come any closer, I'll let go." Lin Xiao suddenly reached out her hand to stop them when they were almost in front of her. "You! Hurry and give Debeo back to me. Give my Debeo back to me." The woman and the man called Yang Hui immediately stopped. The woman looked at her son who was being held outside the window by Lin Xiao with a face full of fear. Yang Hui looked at Lin Xiao with a face full of anger. "How dare you? Do you know who this child is? If anything happens to him, the few of you here won't be enough to pay for it." Yang Hui didn't think that Lin Xiao would be so arrogant and dare to cause more trouble than him. He and this woman both relied on the fact that they had the support of the leader. No one in the base dared to touch them. The way they did things had always been so condescending and tyrannical. However, the moment Lin Xiao came, he actually dared to make a move on the leader's nephew. As expected, as soon as he finished speaking, there was the sound of running. Everyone turned around. Immediately, they saw 10 to 20 soldiers in the base's military uniform rush over. They surrounded Lin Wenwen and Lin Xiao and pointed their guns at them. Chapter 321. Seeing that these soldiers dared to point their guns at her, Long Qingying was angry to begin with, and she immediately exploded. She raised her hand, and the guns in the hands of these soldiers suddenly became distorted. Then they flew out of their hands and gathered above Long Qingying and the others. Then they began to break down into finger-thick icicles that pointed at the soldiers. But she still didn't shoot them. Lin Xiao used a hoarse voice and said to the woman, "What? Encouraging a child not to be harassed by strangers? Is this how your family teaches children?" Then she suddenly turned to look at Yang Hui and changed her expression into one of understanding. "Oh, that's right. All the adults in your family are like this. They don't expect to teach children well because the kind of family has the kind of upbringing. Dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and mice give birth to children that can dig holes. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before?" "Ah, Mom." The naughty child outside was still calling his mom in fear, but Lin Xiao had no intention of letting him in. "I'm telling you, if you dare to hurt my son, I won't let any of you go. Quickly let my son in." The woman roared at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao looked at her, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He sneered at her. "You mean you want me to let go now? Sure, I welcome your leader to come and settle the score with us." Then she shook her hand. "Ah!" This shake immediately scared the naughty child outside. The crotch of his pants was immediately wet, and a pale yellow liquid was dripping down. "No! Stop!" At the same time, the woman's expression changed. Lin Xiao pointed at Lin Wenwen and said to the two who looked like brother and sister, "Apologize to her. Otherwise, don't even think about getting your son back." Yang Hui and his sister looked at each other, and then turned to Lin Wenwen unwillingly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Sorry. What did you say? It's too far, I can't hear you." Lin Wenwen had already suppressed his emotions at this time, and put away the expression on his face. He said calmly. Lin Xiao immediately shouted louder, "Didn't you eat?" Then the two of them glared angrily, and the veins on their foreheads almost popped out. The two of them clenched their fists and took a few deep breaths before saying loudly to Lin Wenwen, "Sorry." Only then did Lin Xiao bring in the little boy who had already wet his pants and put him on the ground. Debao. Seeing that Lin Xiao was finally willing to bring her son in, the woman immediately rushed over and squatted down to hug her son tightly. "Wah! Mommy woo-woo." At that moment, Lin Xiao looked at their hateful gazes and said lightly, "Don't blame me for not reminding you. If anything happens to one of us, I'll come after you. Let's see how you're going to keep your two kids safe. Don't think that your Yang Chao is anything." With that, her figure flickered and she disappeared on the spot. Like a ghost, he came and went without a trace. When the surrounding people saw Lin Xiao's actions, they were somewhat fearful. However, it was not only Yang Hui and his sister. Not only did Lin Xiao appear without anyone noticing, but now she had disappeared right in front of everyone. Even though there were many nature-type superhumans present, they could not sense where she had disappeared to. And from her last words, it seemed like she was not afraid of Yang Chao at all. At that moment, the woman suddenly raised her head and pointed at Lin Wenwen and the others and said to Yang Hui, "Second brother, capture them. I want them to know the consequences of touching my son." She saw that her son in her arms was trembling in fear, and there was also the smell of urine on him. A wave of hatred in her heart immediately broke through her rationality, and now all she wanted was revenge. But seeing that Lin Xiao had disappeared, she immediately wanted to make a move on Lin Wenwen and the others. "Are you done?" Suddenly, a faint voice came from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned around to look and immediately made a path for them. Then they saw Wu Chongyue carrying Wu Yueling and walking out with a faint smile. "Yang Yan, Yang Hui, these are my guests. If you want to cause trouble, you have to look at who you're dealing with. Wu Chonghua smiled and walked to Lin Wenwen and the others. He said to Lin Wenwen, Miss Lin, you guys can leave first. I'll deal with these people. But you guys still have to be careful in the future. After all, there might be people behind you. Lin Wenwen nodded to him. Thank you. After saying that, she glanced coldly at Yang Yan and Yang Hui, then turned around and left with the others. Long Qingying waved her hand, and the metal cones on top of her head immediately shot to the ground a few centimeters in front of the feet of the soldiers who had their guns taken away by her. At that moment, the soldier who had followed them walked to Wu Chongyue's side, whispered a few words in his ear, and then left as well. Wu Chonghua, it's useless even if you want to protect them. I'll let them know what it means to mess with people they shouldn't mess with. Yang Yan did not buy Wu Chongyue's words and shouted at him angrily. But seeing that Lin Wenwen and the others had left, she did not chase after them. After shouting at Wu Chongyue, she immediately carried her son and walked to her daughter who was standing there in a daze. Yun, let's go back. Yang Hui followed behind her and pulled Yang Yan's daughter to leave with her. They didn't even bother to collect the items they had placed on the stall. No one dared to touch them anyway. Wu Chonghua looked at the direction where the two groups of people left and sighed helplessly. Actually, he was just passing by the side of the corridor, but he heard a scream here, so he noticed it. So he saw a group of people gathered here, so he thought that something must have happened. But when he came over to take a look, well, he saw that the female zombie actually carried Yang Chao's nephew out of the window, and looked like she was going to throw him out. Also, Yang Yan and Yang Hui both had a terrified expression on their faces, thinking about the way these two usually did things in the past. They must have messed with them first, and that's why they were scared like this. After watching for a while, he heard the female zombie tell Yang Yan and Yang Hui to apologize to Lin Wenwen, who was standing on the side, which confirmed his thoughts. Now that he thought about what the female zombie did, it felt like an eye for an eye. Didn't you encourage children to play malicious pranks on others? Then she also played a prank. She didn't think about the consequences, whether or not Yang Chao would take revenge on Lin Wenwen and the others behind their backs. Thinking about it, Wu Chonghua said to Mengyu, send a few people to secretly protect these people. If there's any situation, immediately report to me. Mengyu nodded, then turned around and left. And Wu Chonghua also carried Wu Yueling and left with a few of his subordinates. Chapter 322. I told you to wear fewer skirts, but you didn't believe me. Look, we're in trouble now. Long Qingying looked at the angry Lin Wenwen and said, how would I know? I thought we wouldn't have to run around in the base like outside. I didn't expect to meet such a disgusting family and that naughty kid. Humph. Lin Wenwen said unwillingly. Suddenly, she thought of something and stopped to look around. Miss Lu, are you there? I know you're here. Thank you so much for just now. Lin Xiao appeared from the side and said to her, be careful in places with many people in the future. You're a girl and you're pretty. This isn't the Pluto King of Hell's base anymore. The people here won't be afraid of you. And what Wu Chonghua said was right. From now on, all of you have to be careful of that Yang. He'll definitely find a way to take revenge on us. Lin Wan nodded and I understand. At this moment, Long Qingying suddenly asked, by the way, where have you been these days? Didn't you go after Deputy Leader Yuan that day? But he said that it was Lily who went that day, not you. Lin Xiao turned around and said, I was dealing with some things in the space today, so I came out. I didn't expect to see you in trouble when I came out. Your girls don't run around all the time, okay? As she spoke to Lin Wenwen, she couldn't help but use the tone that she used to educate her. Oh. Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying both nodded. Then they followed her up. When they arrived at the mission hall, they saw Chen Yuding standing in their position. He was discussing something with Lin Hao and Du Yuanxing. Huh? Why are you here? Did you find someone to help? Lin Wenwen walked over and asked curiously. The people who were talking turned around and saw them coming up. Especially when they saw Lin Xiao, who hadn't appeared for a few days, they were stunned. Chen Yuding quickly reacted, then nodded and said with a smile, oh, you're right. I did bring some people for you. Lin Wenwen's eyes lit up and asked, how many? Chen Yuding raised 3 fingers at her. 30. Lin Wenwen asked. It's 300. Lin Hao said at the side. Really? That was great. But, Captain Chun, where did you get so many people? Lin Wenwen was elated to hear this. Then he asked doubtfully. Chen Yuding said, I didn't find them. Leader Wu sent them to you. Lin Wenwen and Lin Xiao were stunned. Leader Wu? Will he send 300 men? Chen Yuding nodded. That's great. Then we can go to work soon, right? Lin Wenwen said with a little excitement, looking at them with a pair of beautiful bright eyes. Lin Hao and the others nodded in agreement. Du Yuanqing continued, Oh, but we'll have to wait for the 5 people who came for the interview today. Or send someone to their residence to inform them. They live in the same place anyway. Lin Wenwen nodded and said, Let's go back tonight and ask Big Brother and Brother Qianqing to set the departure time, and then send someone to inform them. The others nodded. In a room on the other side of the mission office, Pu Zhitsong stood by the window, his eyes fixed on Long Qingying's figure. Who are those people over there? He asked the person behind him. The person sitting on the sofa drinking tea was Yang Hui, who had just been in the trading room. He stood up and walked to Pu Zhitsong's side. Following his gaze, he looked in that direction. Oh, they seem to be the people from the destroyed Netherworld King's base. They were just messing around with my sister in the trading room and made us lose face. Which one do you like? The one with the katana? I'm telling you, I like the one in the skirt. Don't fight with me, Yang Hui said. Pu Zhitsong licked his dry lips, his eyes full of lust and desire. He said, No, I like the one with the katana. Look at that back, how straight is it? Her temperament is so cold. I wonder if it will be different when she's being fucked by a man. TSK. I'm a little excited just thinking about it. Yang Hui said with some fear. Wu Changyue said that those people from Netherworld King's base are under his protection. So if you want to make a move, you better not let him find anything. Otherwise, you'll have to deal with the consequences yourself. Pu Zhitsong said disdainfully, So what if he's protecting them? Isn't that Chen Yuding also under his protection? I've already fucked Chen Yuding's wife today. But she's just an ordinary woman, nothing fun. If it weren't for her big breasts, she wouldn't have lasted long. Yang Hui looked at him in surprise and said, You made a move on Chen Yuding's woman? Where is she now? Pu Zhitsong said, She's still in Area F. I gave her to my brothers to play with. Yang Hui's expression became slightly serious and said, You better not be found out, or my boss won't be able to protect you. You have to know the consequences of making a move on a woman in the base. Pu Zhitsong said carelessly, No, they won't be able to find her. When they returned at night, Lin Wenwen gave Lin Feng the list of people they recruited today, and the list brought by Chen Yuding. Lin Feng took the list and nodded knowingly. Yes, when we went over at noon today, Leader Wu also told us that he would send some people over to give them to us. Each person will be given food according to their level of work. Yuan Tianqing sat on the side and said, Now there are about 350 people. We still need a few big trucks to bring them over. Then he suddenly looked at Lin Xiao, who was playing rock-paper-scissors with Xiao Lu, and said, For Miss Lu's sake, Leader Wu also helped us solve the problem of the trucks. Lin Xiao looked back at him and said in a hoarse voice, Well, he really knows how to return a favor. Lin Feng looked at her and asked curiously, By the way, when Xiao Lu awakened last time, how come it only took you one night to wake up little Lu? This time it took you 3 days to wake up Leader Wu's daughter? Is it because she's too young? Lin Xiao said no, it's because it's been many days since his daughter awakened. Yuan Tianqing used my lake water to suppress the progress of her awakening. But the accumulated energy was too dense. So we were afraid that his daughter's body couldn't bear it, so we could only spend more time to transfer the energy. Yuan Tianqing then said, Then when do we leave? Take the first batch of people there? Lin Feng looked at him and then at Lin Xiao. What do you think? You chose the location so you can arrange the time. Yuan Tianqing nodded in agreement. Lin Xiao continued to play rock-paper-scissors with Lin Xiaolu and said directly, Tomorrow afternoon. We leave at 2 o'clock. Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, Okay. We can send someone to inform the previous candidates in the morning. And inform Chen Yuding. Chapter 323. Hearing Yuan Tianqing say that he would send someone to inform Chen Yuding and the others tomorrow morning, Lin Xiao said, For the first batch, I will bring Lily and Meng Meng to suppress the zombies. Then I'll have them stay there, and I'll follow you back to bring more people. The next day, everyone went out early in the morning. Mrs. Lin Xiaolu, Chang Wangxue, and Lin Feng's family, except for Lin Wenwen who stayed in the base, went with the first group. Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying continued to follow Yuan Tianqing to recruit people in the base. They would go there after the second batch had enough people. When they arrived at the agency building, Lin Feng had Li Zheng and the rest split up to inform the others. Early in the morning, Lin Xiao had been staring at Lin Yu until Lin Yu's hair stood on end. Only then did he secretly ask Lin Hao next to him, "Why do I always feel that Miss Lu's eyes behind her sunglasses are staring at me?" Lin Hao glanced at Lin Xiao and saw that Lin Xiao was also looking in Lin Yu's direction. Then he turned back and said to Lin Yu, "Did you do something to her?" Lin Yu shook his head and said, "I didn't do anything. And today is the first time I've seen her. I've only heard about her from you guys before." As he spoke, he suddenly saw Lin Xiao walking towards him. He was so frightened that he immediately fell silent. Then he and Lin Hao looked at Lin Xiao walking in front of them with blank and puzzled expressions. Lin Xiao walked in front of Lin Yu. This was the first time she had seen this person today. Seeing that he was with Li Zheng and the others, he guessed that they should be together. With one hand on her waist and the other on her chin, she sized Lin Yu up. He suddenly leaned over and sniffed. However, when she got closer, Lin Yu was so scared that he didn't dare to move. Lin Hao looked at Lin Xiao's actions curiously and could not help but ask, "What's wrong? Is there something wrong with him?" Lin Xiao retracted his nose. He looked at Lin Yu and said, "I recognize you, but I remember 2 months ago, weren't you about to die? How did he come back to life? Moreover, he didn't turn into a zombie, but a psychic." She walked over and smelled his scent. Suddenly, she remembered where she had seen this man before. Wasn't this the dying man he had saved in a warehouse when he had just woken up from being a zombie, and had not yet rescued Xiao Budian? She remembered that she had accidentally bitten him. At that time this guy was almost out of breath, wasn't he? Now he was standing in front of him alive and well. What was going on? He did not feed him with the lake water, nor did he bring him into the lake. Logically speaking, the virus should have spread and turned him into a zombie. What was happening now? Fuck, what brought him back from the dead? Could it be that he happened to awaken his ability at the same time? Or something like that? Therefore Lin Xiao scratched his chin and thought about it. Then he became dumbfounded again and stared at Lin Yu in a daze. His fingers were gently scratching at his chin. Lin Yu was scared silly by her words. How did this woman know that he was about to die? And he even knew that he would become a zombie? Li Zheng had given them a strict order not to tell anyone about it. Therefore, other than Li Zheng and the other 4, even Lin Feng, Yuan Tianqing, and the others did not know about this. Therefore, the two of them looked at each other in a daze. Lin Hao and the others were stunned when they heard Lin Xiao's words. Lin Hao did not know the truth, so he was confused. But from Lin Xiao's words, he could guess some things. Huh? Why did Lin Yu become a zombie? Have you seen him before? Oh yeah, you also went south from City B 2 months ago. At that time they happened to be coming here. It seems that you met on the way. He looked at Lin Xiao and asked, then turned to ask Lin Yu, "Did you get bitten?" Lin Xiao continued to stare at Lin Yu and said, "Yes, I was on the way to the south." Lin Yu was surprised and confused. He did not know how to answer Lin Hao's question. Lin Xiao asked curiously, "Oh right, do you remember that you were bitten by me at that time? My teeth are infected with a virus." Then she pointed at Lin Yu's chest. When Lin Yu heard this, he suddenly woke up. His expression changed slightly, and then he looked at Lin Xiao with shock, surprise, and confusion. Lin Xiao was too close to him, and his emotions were exposed too much. Lin Yu immediately sensed what he was thinking, because Lin Yu's mind was thinking about the scene when he woke up in the warehouse, and his confused feelings about his situation. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Oh, so it was like this. You woke up that night and found yourself alive again. You even hurt yourself to see if the blood was red." Lin Yu said at this time, I never knew where this tooth mark came from. But if there is a reason why I was alive again, I always think it has something to do with this tooth mark. Now that I know it was you, I am relieved." Lin Xiao was stunned, then said with a strange face, "What? My teeth can have this effect?" As long as a living person is bitten by a zombie and is still breathing, can I get rid of the virus if I bite him again? Your assumption is baseless. Lin Yu said, but I didn't know anything at that time. I didn't even know what happened to me. Apart from this tooth mark, nothing changed on my body. If you didn't save me, who else could it be? Lin Xiao scratched his chin and thought for a moment, then said, Do you remember what time you woke up? Lin Yu answered without hesitation. It was 1 or 2 in the middle of the night. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and said, Oh, I also left at 1 or 2 in the morning. I remember I brought you into the space, but I didn't do anything to you. Except that I accidentally fell on you, and then my teeth pricked you. Then he compared his own situation with Lin Yu's, and it seemed that it was really his teeth that played a role. No way. After the conversation between the two, the people next to them looked at the two of them in a daze. Miss Liu, don't you have any pathogens in your teeth? Or, it only has a negative effect on people who have been infected with the virus? After listening to the conversation between the two, Lin Hao frowned and looked at Lin Xiao with a thoughtful look. He was originally a medical student, so he was more sensitive in this aspect. Lin Xiao looked at him. It can't be. Lin Hao looked at her with a face full of exploration and then said, How about, you try it? Find an infected animal, but it hasn't mutated or died, bite it, and then see the situation? Lin Xiao looked at him strangely. I will eat it directly. Lin Hao. Chapter 324. On the other side, in Wu Qingyue's house early in the morning, Wu Chengyue, Meng Yu, Xiao Yunlong, Chen Yuding and others were all in the living room. Chen Yuding's expression was haggard and anxious as he paced back and forth on the empty space in front of the tea table. His eyes were bloodshot. The expressions of the others were also extremely solemn. Wu Chengyue looked at him and asked, Are you so sure that it was Pu Zhetsong who took your lover? Do you have any evidence? Chen Yuding shook his head and said with an angry expression, He purposely came to look for trouble with me yesterday morning. And when he left, he said that he would definitely look for him himself. If it wasn't him, I thought there was no one else. Everyone in the base knew that he was a pervert who liked to abuse women. Furthermore, none of the women he had played with had survived to the end. Now that my Xiao Zhan is missing, he must have done it in secret. Xiao Yunlong looked at Wu Chengyue and agreed. Maybe it really is him. Wu Chengyue nodded, then frowned and said, But we don't have any evidence. After all, he is also a deputy leader of the base. The most important thing now is to find him. Then he asked Chen Yuding, Do you have any clues? Do you know where she went missing? Chen Yuding said, My team members who were in charge of protecting little Zhan said that they were knocked out on the way in a deserted place, and there were a lot of people on the other side. When he woke up, little Zhan had already disappeared. I sent people to search the area, but they didn't find anything. Wu Chengyue thought about it and looked at Meng Yu saying, Well, I'll let Meng Yu follow you to that place again. Maybe she'll find something. Meng Yu nodded. Chen Yuding knew that Meng Yu was Logia, so he nodded and said, All right. I can only trouble Miss Meng. Meng Yu smiled and said, You're welcome. At this time, Xiao Liqing came in and said, Leader, the people from the Netherworld King's base are here. Everyone in the room turned to look at Xiao Liqing. Wu Chengyue said, He must be here to inform them of the departure time. Show him in. Yes. Good morning, everyone. It was Li Zheng who came in. He had come to inform Wu Chengyue to borrow a car. When he walked in and saw Chen Yuding in the room, he was slightly surprised. Captain Chen? Why are you here at Chief Wu's place so early? He had even sent Lei Yao to Chen Yuding's house to inform him. The others went to find those who came to apply on their own. Xiao Yunlong immediately stood up and said, Oh, you are here to borrow a car. The caravan is ready for you. Where do you want to meet? What time are we leaving? Li Zheng cast a puzzled look at Chen Yuding, and when he heard Xiao Yunlong's question, he turned his head to look at him and said, Oh, we will leave at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Gather at the plaza in front of the agency building in Area D. Xiao Yunlong nodded and then said, Well, then I will inform the driver to drive the car there before 2 o'clock. Also, the 300 people on our side will directly follow the vehicles. Li Zheng smiled and nodded. Yes. Thank you, Leader Wu, for lending us your truck and manpower. Wu Chengyue shook his head politely and said, You're welcome. We are all partners and we still need to exchange for your food. With your job, many people won't have to worry about starving to death this winter. Li Zheng nodded, then suddenly looked at Chen Yuding and said, Oh yes, Captain Chen, there should be no problem with the people on your side, right? Will they all arrive at noon? I feel that you don't seem to be in a very good state right now. Did something happen? Chen Yuding said with a distressed expression, I may not be able to go with you for the time being. As he spoke, he turned his head to look at Wu Chengyue. Wu Chengyue thought for a moment, then suddenly looked at Xiao Yunlong and said, Yunlong, why don't you lead the team first? I will help deal with Chen Yuding's matter. Xiao Yunlong nodded, then walked over to Chen Yuding and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, I will find your wife. With that he walked out of the door. Li Zheng looked doubtfully at Chen Yuding, but it was not appropriate for him to ask about other people's business. He had to leave first, then I'll go first. You guys go ahead. Then he turned around and took 2 steps before he suddenly stopped and turned back. He looked at Chen Yuding and said, if you need any help you can tell us. Chen Yuding reluctantly nodded to him. Yes. Thank you. After Li Zheng left, Wu Chengyue looked at his back. Suddenly he thought of the female zombie. Wasn't she a zombie? She must be very sensitive to the smell of people. If he asked her for help, maybe it would be faster to find Chen Yuding's lover. Thinking of this, he suddenly said to Li Zheng, who was about to go outside, Please wait a minute. Li Zheng and Xiao Yunlong stopped together, looking back at him with a puzzled expression. What's the matter? Li Zheng said. Wu Chengyue asked, Where is your Miss Lu? I don't know if you can ask her to come over? Li Zheng looked at him with a puzzled expression. You are looking for Miss Lu? I have to go back and ask her. Wu Chengyue said. Then please go back and tell her that I have a favor to ask her. I don't know what price she needs to pay. Li Zheng nodded and said, Okay. I will go back and bring your words to her. After Li Zheng left, Wu Chengyue looked at Chen Yuding and said, I have a way, if that Miss Lu is willing to help. She should be able to find where your Xiaozhan is hidden very soon. Chen Yuding's eyes lit up and asked eagerly, Really? Wu Chengyue smiled confidently and said, She is not an ordinary person. In terms of finding people, she is probably better than Mengyu. Then he turned his head and looked at Mengyu. Mengyu looked at him with a strange expression and said, You want to use her as a military dog? She also knew that Miss Lu was the female zombie that he flashed past. Of course, she knew how sensitive zombies were to the smell of people, even more sensitive than dogs. Especially such a high-level zombie. The smile on Wu Chengyue's face became unpredictable and said, Hey, don't say this in front of her. You will be out of luck, I'm telling you. Mengyu rolled her eyes at him. Chen Yuding didn't know Lin Xiao's identity, so he didn't seem to understand what they were talking about. At this time a gray rabbit jumped down from the stairs, and then he saw Wu Yueling holding the handrail and walking down step by step. Wu Chengyue immediately turned around and walked over. Lingling, you're up? Wu Yueling saw him walking over and stood in the same place, waiting for him to pick her up. Wu Chengyue came over and held her in his arms, touching her soft hair that was messy because she just got up. Are you hungry? Let's go wash our faces and brush our teeth first. Okay? Wu Yueling looked at the 2 people in the living room and looked back at the gray rabbit that had already jumped down. Then she nodded. Chapter 325. On the other side, Li Zheng and Xiao Yunlong separated. In addition to informing the 300 people given by Wu Chengyue, Xiao Yunlong also went to inform Chen Yuding's deputy captain. He asked someone to bring the team members to the square. It didn't take long for Li Zheng to return to the square, and saw that Lei Yao was the first to come back. Lei Yao saw him and said, Chen Yuding is not at home. I heard from his neighbors that he didn't come back last night. It seems that his wife is missing. Li Zheng listened and thought of Chen Yuding's expression when he saw him at Wu Chengyue's house. He nodded and said, That's right. I saw him at Leader Wu's place. He was really in a bad mood. Lei Yao said, Is he still going with us? Li Zheng shook his head and then walked to Lin Xiao and Lin Feng. Wu Chengyue's team will bring his 300 people here before 2 o'clock. Also, he asked you to go to his house first. He seems to want to ask you for help. He said that you can set the conditions. Lin Xiao looked at him doubtfully and said, From what you two just said, Chun Yuding couldn't find anyone last night and then went to Wu Changyue to ask for help this morning. But why did Wu Changyue ask me to help? Li Zheng also shook his head and said, I don't know. He just said that he wants to see what conditions you need. Lin Xiao thought for a moment. Did that man know her identity as a zombie? He wanted her to help him find someone? But she didn't seem to take off her glasses in front of him. How did he know? Thinking of this, she denied the idea. If he really knew her identity, wouldn't he drive her out of the base? Wasn't he afraid that she would go crazy in the base? And why did he ask her to go there? To find someone? Did he think she was a police dog? She rolled her eyes and looked at the time. It was only 9 o'clock, not 10 o'clock. There were still 4 hours before the departure time, so she could go and see the situation. If that was the case, he only needed to give her 100 people. Then she would help. Okay, I'll go, Lin Xiao said to Li Zheng. Then she said to Lin Feng and went in the direction of Wu Chengyue's house. In Zone F, Shen Yuzhen, the woman who was captured and locked up in a room by Pu Shuokang's men, was Chun Yuding's wife. But at this time she was no longer the same as she was yesterday. At this time she was lying on the bed like a broken doll. The clothes on his body had been torn to shreds and only pieces of cloth were left hanging on his body. His originally fair body was covered in bruises and his lower body was a mess of blood stains. Her face was also sad, and her eyes were half closed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Since Pu Ziakang had humiliated her yesterday, the other men had come in one after another. She didn't even know how many people had come in and gone out. How many times had she been fucked since yesterday afternoon? And he didn't stop for the whole night. In the dark night, there was nothing scarier than a man who couldn't see clearly on top of her. In the morning, her consciousness was already fuzzy. His breathing also weakened. Several men outside the door said with some regret at this time, "We're too cruel. This woman probably won't live for more than a few hours. It's all your fault. I told you to restrain yourselves. You still need to use it in the future, but you all act as if you have never touched a woman in your life. Tell me, how many times have you been in there? 3 times, 4 times, 2 times, 2 times, you see? Don't you think that this woman is an ordinary person? Can her delicate body allow you to play with her like this? Well, she's dead. Now think about how to deal with the body. Can't we just throw it out of the base secretly? How? There are people guarding the walls. If we go up, we will definitely be discovered." The men discussed how to deal with Shen Yuzhen inside, even though she was not completely dead yet. Although she was not completely dead, they already regarded her as a dead person. Wait, I have an idea. Doesn't the research institute need zombies? We can turn this woman into a zombie and then send it over. Suddenly, a man's mind flashed, and then his eyes lit up. The others looked at him in confusion and asked inexplicably, "Turn her into a zombie? How? Where do we go to find the zombie virus first?" The man who came up with the idea smiled slyly and said, "Don't worry about this, I can get the virus now. You just ruin her face and don't let people recognize her original appearance. Wait for me to come back." After saying that, he hurriedly turned around and left, leaving the others looking at each other in the same place. What a pity, we haven't had enough of this woman. Yes, but she's too weak. Hey, she's going to die anyway. Why don't we go in again while she's still alive? There won't be another chance like this if we miss this opportunity. I don't know when we will encounter such a wonderful thing again. Hey, that's a good idea. Let's go in. Then they immediately turned around and entered the dark room. Then they took turns to humiliate the motionless woman on the bed. On the other side, Chun Yuding had been restlessly waiting for Li Zheng's news with Wu Changyue. After waiting for about half an hour, Xiao Liqing ran in and said, "Leader, Miss Lu is here." Wu Changyue and Wu Yueling were watching her eat in the dining room. Hearing Xiao Liqing's report, they immediately nodded and said, "Let her in." On the other side, Chun Yuding immediately stood up from the sofa. Xiao Liqing turned around and left, and not long after, Lin Xiao walked in. "Tell me, what do you need my help with?" Her hoarse voice rang out. Wu Changyue raised his head and looked at her. Before he could say anything, Wu Yueling, who was in front of him, suddenly threw her fork into the bowl. Then she slid down from the chair and ran happily towards Lin Xiao in her little slippers. "Hey, you haven't finished your breakfast yet." Wu Chongyue stared blankly at his own daughter happily running towards the zombie. Just as he finished speaking, he saw a gray shadow flash on the ground and jump towards Lin Xiao. This was a real jump and it was a very high jump. Lin Xiao saw Xiao Budian running towards him so happily, and smiled as he bent over and picked her up. Are you full? While speaking, he walked over to the sofa and sat down. Tell me, what are you looking for me for? If it's a deal, I only need manpower. Chen Yuding immediately said to her, Miss Liu, can you help me find my wife? Lin Xiao looked at him, nodded and said, I already know about your wife. If you're looking for me just to find your wife, then give me another 50 people. Then give me another 50 people if you can find them and bring them back. Add another 50. Chapter 326. Wu Chongyue and Meng Yu looked at Wu Yueling and the rabbit that jumped to Lin Xiao's side. They couldn't help but look at her strangely. Wasn't she a zombie? Why did small animals and children want to be close to her? Or did she have something on her body? Wu Chongyue had always been concerned about the fact that Lin Xiao had stolen his daughter's heart. Only 50 people? I thought you would have other conditions. He walked over and sat down on the sofa. Lin Xiao put Wu Yueling on her lap and turned to look at him. You should know that what we need the most right now is manpower. We don't lack anything else. Wu Chongyue nodded. Yes, that's true. Lin Xiao said, tell me, you want me to take you to find the person? Or should I bring the person back to you? 50 for the former and 100 for the latter. Wu Chongyue looked at Chen Yuding's impatient face and said, you can take us there directly. If it's manpower, I can give it to you. We can also take 10% less of your labor remuneration. How about it? Lin Xiao nodded. Okay. Then she turned to Chen Yuding and said, your wife is missing. Do you have anything on her? I want to confirm her smell. Chen Yuding looked at Wu Chongyue with some surprise, but he saw a faint smile on his face. Then he immediately took out a broken bracelet from his pocket and handed it to Lin Xiao. This is Xiao Zhan's bracelet, but it fell in the place where she went missing yesterday. Lin Xiao took it and sniffed it before giving it to him. I got it. She carried Wu Yueling to the sofa and said, little one, sit here for a while. I'll be back soon. As she spoke, she picked up the gray furry ball that had jumped onto the sofa and placed it in her arms. Wu Yueling held the gray furry ball and looked at Lin Xiao and nodded obediently. Lin Xiao stood up and walked toward the door. Wu Chongyue and Chen Yuding also stood up and followed her out. Chen Yuding followed Lin Xiao closely. As a result, when he came out, he saw Lin Xiao suddenly bend his legs and jump to the top of Wu Chongyue's 3-story building. Then he jumped from the top of the building to the top of a telephone pole next to him. Then Lin Xiao quietly stood on top of the telephone pole, looking left and right. After Wu Chongyue came out, he said to Xiao Liqing, gather 30 people and prepare for action. Xiao Liqing immediately nodded, then turned around and left quickly. Wu Chongyue walked to Chen Yuding's side and looked up at Lin Xiao with him. Then Lin Xiao jumped down again. He gently landed in front of them. The direction is that way. I have to remind you to move faster, because Lin Xiao pointed in the direction of Area F. Then he paused and looked at Chen Yuding. Her breath is very weak. If we go any later, we might not be able to make it. Chen Yuding's expression changed, and his eyes widened slightly. Wu Qingyue's face darkened. He turned around and walked out. Let's go. Behind them, Xiao Liqing quickly drove an off-road vehicle out. Lin Xiao got into the passenger seat. Then she pointed in the direction of Area F and said, it's over there. The smell is very mixed. Xiao Liqing looked at her and asked uncertainly, is it Area F? At this time, Wu Chongyue sat in the back seat and said, it's Area F, hurry up. Yes. Xiao Liqing immediately started the car and drove out. Lin Xiao, who was in the front, looked back at Wu Chongyue. She saw that the man was smiling, and she couldn't tell what he was thinking. As long as it was his little princess, he would have an unpredictable smile on his face. You can understand me, Wu Chongyue said with a smile. I'm just guessing, because we can guess the direction you are pointing in. Lin Xiao said, then why are you so sure? Wu Chongyue didn't answer. He just stared at her sunglasses with a smile. Lin Xiao looked at him inexplicably, and then ignored him. She couldn't understand the man's eyes at this time. At this time Wu Changyue suddenly said, "You cut your hair so short. Is it because I hit you with lightning?" Lin Xiao instantly turned back and stared at him closely under the sunglasses. Wu Changyue only felt that he was locked by her eyes, and an invisible aura spread in the car. Chen Yuding and Xiao Liqing, who was driving, suddenly felt that the car was suffocating. Only Wu Changyue smiled as if nothing had happened. "Hey, why are you nervous? Is it because I recognized you?" Lin Xiao looked at the other two people and then turned back to the front. "Do you think I'm nervous? That's just my natural reaction." As she said that, she suddenly stuck her head out of the window and sniffed ahead. Then she shrank back and said to Xiao Liqing, "Hurry up, turn left 500 meters ahead." After more than 10 minutes, Lin Xiao and the others arrived at the refugee area in Area F. At this time, in the dark room upstairs in Area F, Shen Yuzhen's chest was already very light, almost as if it was not moving at all. There was a man lying on top of her and he kept moving. Several men were squatting and leaning against the corner of the wall, discussing in surprise. "Hey, she's hanging on for so long in her last breath. This woman must not want to die. Lao San, be more aggressive. If you can't kill her, don't come down." "Ha ha ha, yes, you said she gave you her last breath. Look, you've been doing it for half an hour. She's not dead yet." Hearing what they said, the other person next to them said, "Alright, don't really kill him. First inject the zombie blood, and then let her slowly die." The man lying on Shen Yuzhen's body suddenly moved intensely, and then suddenly stopped. Then he lay still on Shen Yuzhen's body for a while, and then he got up and pulled up his pants. Unfortunately, there's no reaction," the man said while fastening his pants. The man who said to keep her alive then walked to the bed. In the dark room, the syringe in his hand flashed. The syringe was half filled with dark red blood. He didn't know where this man got the zombie blood from. He bent down and pulled up Shen Yuzhen's bruised arm, and then inserted the syringe into it. Then, he pushed the vial of blood that carried the zombie virus into it. The injection of blood didn't make Shen Yuzhen, who was already like a corpse, have any reaction. After the man took out the syringe, he said to the others, "Bring the bag." They were going to inject this woman with the virus blood, and then secretly take her to the research institute while she was sick. Because the virus didn't spread that fast in a living person's body, there was still some time for them to take the woman to another place. At this time there was a loud noise. Bang! The door of the room was suddenly kicked open. Chapter 327. Bang! The door was kicked open with great force. Then a hoarse voice came from outside the door. "You'd better not move or I'll cut off your feet." "Who is it?" The people inside were all shocked, jumping in fright. He shouted towards the outside with a face full of shock. Then they saw a strange person wearing a hat appear outside the door. Because of the hoarse voice, the people inside couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. Now that the person appeared, he was standing in a place with his back to the light. They could only see a silhouette, but not the tall chest in front of him. Seeing the person come in, they immediately knew that the other party didn't have good intentions. So they directly ignored Lin Xiao's words. They all moved, preparing to use their special abilities. Lin Xiao suddenly opened his claws and swung. Puff puff puff, after a few sounds of flesh being cut, there were shrill screams that spread far away. Then these people fell to the ground. My feet! My feet! Lin Xiao walked in slowly. There was an indescribable smell mixed with the strong smell of blood in the room. Because the door was wide open, the light in the room immediately became several times brighter. Everything could be seen clearly. At this time there was a rush of footsteps outside. And then Chen Yuding was the first to come over. Xiaozhen! Xiaozhen! Little. But when he ran to the door and looked in again, he saw that the door was empty. Suddenly, his voice was choked in his throat, and he couldn't make a sound. He widened his eyes and looked at Shen Yuzhen, who was lying on the bed without a trace of life. At this time, Wu Changyue came over with his men and saw the scene in the room. After seeing the scene in the room, the smile on his face faded, and he walked in expressionlessly. Chen Yuding walked step by step toward Shen Yuzhen on the bed in a daze. Wu Changyue's expression was solemn as he followed behind him. She still has a breath. Lin Xiao's voice came. She walked to the bed, reached out and touched Shen Yuzhen on the bed, and then said, "But she seems to be waiting to see you for the last time." Her words were like a bolt of lightning, striking Chan Yuding's mind. He lost all ability to react. As for those men who had their legs chopped off by Lin Xiao, they were lying on the ground and about to faint. Xiao Liqing took the initiative to bring people in and tied up the men. Then he was dragged out. Lin Xiao took off his coat and covered Shen Yuzhen's bruised body. She waved her hand and a glass of clear water appeared in her hand. As soon as Wu Changyue saw her water, his eyes lit up. Then he stared at her closely. "This water came from you? Or did you get it from Yuan Tianxing?" Lin Xiao pried open Shen Yuzhen's mouth and poured the water into her mouth. Hearing Wu Changyue's words, he just replied faintly, "Why don't you guess?" Wu Changyue watched her put away the empty cup, then looked at Shen Yuzhen. He then turned his head to look at Lin Xiao, who was not wearing a jacket. He was wearing a military vest inside. Her white arms and slender waist appeared before his eyes. The last time he saw her in the Westlake district, she was dressed like this. She was wearing a loose camouflage uniform, which seemed to be for men. In addition, she was not short, so she really looked like a man after cutting her hair and wearing a hat. But as soon as the jacket was taken off, her hot figure was revealed. Lin Xiao looked at Shen Yuzhen, her hands hugging her chest. She squeezed her chest, revealing the cleavage in front of her. She raised a hand and scratched her chin with her fingers. Just now, she did not say that this woman was infected with the virus because she did not use water to test whether the virus could be removed from an infected person. She only knew that the virus in zombies' bodies could be suppressed. So she wanted to give this woman a glass of water before Chan Yuding and Wu Changyue knew the situation. Anyway, after drinking this water, it would be enough for her to hang on for a little longer. She felt Wu Changyue's gaze on her body, so she looked down and glanced at her white chest. Fortunately, she found a suitable bra to wear a few days ago, otherwise, she really did not dare to take off her coat. If it were not for the two men looking at the naked body in the room without any self-awareness, she would not have taken off her coat. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and decided to divert his gaze. "Can I ask you a question?" Wu Changyue looked up at her. "Ask me?" Lin Xiao nodded. Wu Changyue looked at Chan Yuding, who was holding Shen Yuzhen at this time, and said, "Can you save the question for later? She still needs help." Lin Xiao was stunned and asked, "Can she be saved like this?" She did not know who else had the ability to save Shen Yuzhen in this state except for her lake water. Wu Changyue said, "There is one person who may be able to." Then he said to Chan Yuding, "Let's go. Go back and find Dr. Liang." Chan Yuding picked up Shen Yuzhen's body and then followed Wu Changyue out. Lin Xiao was also interested in this Dr. Liang he mentioned, so she silently followed him out. She took Shen Yuzhen back to Chan Yuding's home quickly. Chan Yuding carefully put Shen Yuzhen on the bed and covered her with the quilt before returning the clothes to Lin Xiao. Although his beloved woman had been ruined like this, he still said to Lin Xiao sincerely, "Thank you for helping me find Xiao Zhan." Lin Xiao took the clothes and waved at him carelessly. "You're welcome. I didn't help for nothing." Then she glanced at Wu Changyue. Wu Changyue knew what she meant and said, "I see. I have asked Xiaoqing to take care of your people just now. There will be 50 more people in the afternoon. Don't worry." Lin Xiao continued to ask him, "Then can I ask you the question just now?" Wu Changyue looked at her curiously and said, "As a condition for answering the question, can I see what you look like without your sunglasses?" Lin Xiao was speechless. After 3 seconds of silence, she raised her hand and took off her sunglasses without hesitation. She had a beautiful face, and then her eyelids opened. Chan Yuding, who was next to her, was shocked and jumped back. "You leader, she is." Chan Yuding pointed at Lin Xiao's dark green eyes and looked at Wu Changyue in panic. Wu Changyue looked at Lin Xiao's face and thought that she was quite beautiful when she recovered her appearance. However, he felt that he had seen her somewhere before. "Have we met somewhere before?" Lin Xiao put her sunglasses back on calmly. She said, "Answer my question first. Xiao Budian is not your biological daughter, right?" As soon as she finished speaking, Wu Changyue was silent. The smile on his face also disappeared. No one could tell what he was thinking at this time with his expressionless face. Chan Yuding, who was next to her, looked at her in surprise and then at Wu Changyue. At this moment, Footsteps were heard at the door. Meng Yu, who was holding Wu Yueling, appeared with Dr. Liang and Emily. Chapter 328. As soon as he saw Dr. Liang, Chen Yuding immediately rushed to him. Dr. Liang, please save my wife. Please, you must save her. Liang Dashu said to him, don't worry, let me see. As he spoke, he walked into the room and leaned against the bed. He bent down to check Shen Yuzhen's face and facial features. Then he picked up her wrist and checked her pulse. After a while, Liang Dashu frowned slightly. Just as he was about to put her arm down, he suddenly saw a needle mark on her arm. He was stunned and his expression changed slightly. He carefully opened her eyes again and looked at her for a while. Then he pressed on the area around the needle hole on her arm. When he put Shen Yuzhen's hand back on the bed, he stood up with a very heavy expression. He looked at Chen Yuding and sighed. Seeing him sigh, Chen Yuding only felt his scalp go numb and panic appeared in his eyes. She's on her last breath. But it's possible that she's relieved after she saw you. Under normal circumstances, she should be dead by now. However, I just checked and found that her body isn't completely dead. It's just that her consciousness has disappeared. In other words, her body is protected by some kind of energy, but her brain has stopped working. Liang Dashu looked at him and said. Then he looked at Wu Chengwe and asked, did you guys give her the water that Yuan Tianqing gave Lingling? Because that energy is the same as the energy in Lingling's body. Wu Chengwe turned to look at Chen Yuding. After hearing Liang Dashu's words, Chen Yuding was dumbfounded. Although he didn't quite understand what Liang Dashu meant, he only knew that his Xiaozhen wouldn't wake up, because the doctor said that her consciousness had disappeared. Dr. Liang saw that Wu Chengwe didn't say anything and only looked at Lin Xiao. He knew he was right. But he didn't care about that and turned to Chen Yuding and said, to put it nicely, she's now a vegetable. Only her body functions are still alive, and her brain has entered a state of suspended animation. After a pause, he looked at the others. Then he said, there's one more thing. She was injected with the zombie virus not long ago. The virus has spread throughout her blood, so in her current state, the probability of her turning into a zombie is 100%. When he said that, everyone except Lin Xiao looked at him in shock. Meng Yu subconsciously carried Wu Yueling to the other side, far away from the bed. But soon Meng Yu's gaze followed Wu Chengwe to look at Lin Xiao. Chen Yuding, who had been struck by several lightning bolts, suddenly woke up. He rushed to Lin Xiao's side, bent his knees and knelt in front of her. He lowered his head and said, Miss Chen, can you help me? Even if Xiaozhen turns into a zombie, I don't want her to forget me. You must have a way, right? Because you are. In the end, he raised his head and looked at Lin Xiao with pleading eyes. The others all looked at Lin Xiao. Some were confused, some were deep in thought, and some were expectant. Lin Xiao silently looked at Chen Yuding for more than 10 seconds before saying, you love her very much. Even if she turns into a zombie. Although Chen Yuding wasn't very handsome, his character was upright. From the current situation, it could be seen that he cared about his lover very much. That kind of sadness and despair, Lin Xiao didn't need to touch him to clearly feel it. He was a sincere man. And looking at his pleading eyes, even if she gave him any conditions, he would probably do it. Even if she asked him to die, he might not hesitate. Lin Xiao nodded and said, I can save her, but I don't know what the final result will be. Whether she will remember you and whether she will retain her memory. If I can make her remember you again, then you have to promise me one thing. The blood red in Chen Yuding's eyes almost turned into liquid, but he nodded happily. I promise you anything. Lin Xiao said, if I can save her, you must bring her to our new base. Chen Yuding was stunned when he heard her condition, then looked at her blankly. That's it? Nothing else? He thought that this Miss Lu would ask him to do something for her. Even if he had to go through a mountain of swords or a sea of fire, he would do it. But he didn't expect the other party's condition to be so simple. She just wanted him to move home. Chen Yuding couldn't believe his ears. Lin Xiao nodded indifferently and said, yes, no other requirements. Hearing this, Chen Yuding quickly nodded, I'm willing. If you need manpower, I will bring a few brothers there. Lin Xiao looked at him and said, up to you. But she didn't ask him to bring this woman there because she was short of manpower. She was just afraid that this woman would eventually become a zombie. If she still had reason and memory, she could only stay in her base. Then she could only stay in her base. There was no way she could survive here. Wu Chonghua suddenly said, "She is just worried that if your wife becomes a zombie, she can't survive here. But in her base at least she can protect her, right?" Then he looked at Lin Xiao meaningfully. Lin Xiao. This man was really a leader, he could actually guess her thoughts. Only then did Chun Yuding's expression change. He was stunned. Then he immediately looked at Lin Xiao gratefully. Thank you, thank you." Lin Xiao waved her hand and said, "Don't thank me, I haven't saved her yet. Besides, it's getting late. I'm going to take your wife into my space now. Remember to go to the square at noon. Go with everyone." "Okay, I'll listen to you." Chun Yuding nodded. He stood up from the ground. Wu Chonghua looked at Lin Xiao and said, "Are you going to take my woman away like this?" Lin Xiao looked at him and shrugged. "It's his own choice," he said. At this time Wu Yueling seemed to feel that Lin Xiao was about to leave, so she twisted and slid down from Mengyu's arms. Mengyu looked at her strangely. "Lingling, where are you going?" Then she ran to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao walked to the bed and touched Shen Yuzhen's neck. Then he pulled her hands up and disappeared in a flash. Then, just as she was pulling Shen Yuzhen up, she suddenly felt a weight on her leg. Then she, Shen Yuzhen, and Xiao Budian, who was suddenly hanging on her leg, disappeared into thin air. Looking at his daughter who was running with someone else, Wu Chonghua said, "Was he going to be abandoned? Although he wasn't my biological son, I've raised him since he was born. Ah, his little baby was going to abandon him." Chapter 329. Holding Shen Yuzhen naked in his arms, Lin Xiao looked at the little pendant on his leg with a strange expression. "Your father will be sad," she said to the pendant, amused. Seeing Lin Xiao suddenly come in with a woman in his arms, Lu Jun and Qiu Lily looked at her curiously. Then he saw that there was a pendant on her leg, hugging her calf. "Oh, little girl." Meng Meng was the most excited to see the little guy. She suddenly jumped out of the woods and ran towards Lin Xiao. The little guy immediately hid behind Lin Xiao's leg. Then half of its head popped out and looked at Meng Meng with two sparkling eyes. "Don't scare her," Lin Xiao told Meng Meng. Ah, how was he scaring her? Meng Meng was not annoyed that Wu Yueling was avoiding him. He only protested against what Lin Xiao had said. At this time there was a sudden surge in the lake, and a few jade-white vines broke out of the water. He reached out to Lin Xiao. Little man woke up, but as soon as she appeared, Meng Meng, who had just arrived in front of Lin Xiao, ignored Wu Yueling. She abruptly turned her head to look at Little Man in the lake, then turned around and ran into the woods. "Little Man, you're awake?" Lin Xiao looked at Little Man's vine stretching over and stretched out a finger to catch her. Little Man said happily, Mama, Little Man is hungry." Is this person going to give Little Man food?" With that said, Little Man's other rattan poked Shen Yuzhen in Lin Xiao's arms. Lin Xiao shook his head and said, "Don't worry. This man is no different from being dead. There's only a virus in my body. I can't let you eat it. Wait a moment, I'll go get the corpse core for you." Little Man said. Then Little Man, "Let her come back to life, Mommy. Just give me the energy core. I can use this person to filter the energy." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Then take her away first, I'll go find you a corpse core." As she spoke, she handed Shen Yuzhen to Little Man, and then Little Man took it. Only then did he bend over to pick up Tiny Tot. Then he turned around and walked towards space number 2. Lin Xiao remembered that in the space of the bald robber, there were still a lot of corpse cores left. Seeing Lin Xiao walking over with Tiny Tot in his arms, the zombie leaders in space number 2 all looked at Tiny Tot covetously. But they didn't dare to move. Lin Xiao walked to the door and said to the zombies inside, "Number 4, take out the zombie core. You guys didn't eat it secretly, right?" The zombies who were suspected of stealing food shook their heads in unison. Number 4 quickly turned around and ran to the corner to search. Soon he came back with a pile of corpse cores in his hands. Lin Xiao took out all the level 5 and level 4 beasts and left the rest for them. The zombies said. Ling said, Ling said. Qibing Ling said, Ling said. Ling said. Lin Xiao carried Xiao Budian in one hand and grabbed a corpse core in the other. Pung. He said, Ling Ling said penning, he said Ling penning. He. Ling said he, man Ling said he. And in Ling Chao said Lin Chao said Ling Ling Chao. She was dead, but someone injected zombie blood into her body. She was already dead, but someone injected zombie blood into her body. Why are you helping her? Cho Lily asked. I'm not helping her. Her man loves her so much. Lin Chao said. I'm not trying to help her. I just saw that her man loves her so much. That man said he wouldn't give up on her even if she became a zombie. I want to see if it's true. After all, that man said that even if she becomes a zombie, he will not give up on her. I want to see if it is true. Lu Jun said. You really want to help her? Lin Chao spread his hands and said, no, I just casually did it. Even if I don't agree, that man will find a way to make me agree. Lu Jun and Cho Lily looked at her strangely. That man? Is he the woman's lover? They thought Lin Chao was talking about the man, but Lin Chao shook her head. No, it's her father. She looked down at Tiny Tot. Lu Jun and Cho Lily looked at her with confusion. Lin Chao didn't say anything to them. Okay, I'll take her out. I don't know how long it will take for this woman to complete her mutation. At this time, the people outside looked at each other. Meng Yu said, Brother Yu, it seems that it won't be long. Ling Ling doesn't care about her father anymore. Wu Changhua looked at the gray rabbit who was running around the room looking for Lin Chao or Tiny Tot, and nodded silently. Liang Dashu asked curiously, Leader, why did that strange woman ask you if Ling Ling is your daughter? Meng Yu also looked at Wu Changhua. When they met Wu Changhua, Wu Yueling was already by his side. He had always said that she was his daughter, but no one doubted whether she was his biological daughter or not. Wu Changhua sighed and saw that there was no one in the room. In addition to Meng Yu, Chan Yuding, Liang Dashu, and Mo Li who had been silent, there were only himself and Miss Lu who had just disappeared. He said, Ling Ling is not my daughter. She's just the daughter of a very good friend of mine. When the child was born, the apocalypse happened. My friend turned into a zombie so that he wouldn't hurt the newborn child. His wife fought with him and jumped down from more than 10 stories high. Everyone quieted down and looked at him quietly. Wu Chenghua's smile had a trace of hidden sadness and he said, when I found him, the child was almost dead. So, after I rescued her, I kept her by my side and raised her like my own daughter. Lin Chao appeared and said, is it because I feel that her blood is different from yours? She's not your biological daughter. She's your adopted daughter. Seeing Lin Chao come out, Chen Yuding immediately rushed to her and asked, how is it? Can little Zhen still wake up? Lin Chao put Tiny Tot on the ground and said to him, I don't know yet. We need to wait to know the situation. The others looked at Wu Changhua in surprise and then looked at Wu Yueling who was put on the ground by Lin Chao, and ran to Wu Changhua. Meng Yu suddenly looked at Wu Yueling and asked Wu Changhua, does she know? Wu Changhua nodded and said, she knows. I didn't hide it from her. Lin Chao said to Chan Yuding, remember to go with us in the afternoon. Then she turned around and walked out. Liang Dashu stared at Lin Chao's back until she walked out of the room and went through the living room. Then he asked the others, does she really have a way to save people? Maybe. Wu Changhua gave him an ambiguous answer, and then shouted to Wu Yueling who was holding the gray-haired Mian, Ling Ling, let's go. Chapter 330. On the other side was a luxurious apartment building in Zone B. The facilities of this apartment building were very high-end. There were 7 solar energy storage devices installed on the roof, enough to supply the entire building with electricity. There was also a large pool on the roof where water ability users would go to replenish the water every day. Moreover, this apartment building was very new. At this time, in a luxurious apartment on the top floor, Yang Yan was angrily pacing back and forth in the living room. Her emotions were very unstable as she shouted at a man who looked to be in his 30s sitting on the sofa, Big brother, won't you help me? I don't care who they are or what their relationship is with Wu Changhua. Anyway, they scared my Debeo. I want them dead. Even if they don't die, I will break one of their arms or legs. The man sitting on the sofa looked to be in his 30s, but he was actually in his 40s. The man had a regular face, bright eyebrows, and a high nose bridge. He was a very attractive man no matter how one looked at him. His facial features were 40% similar to Yang Yan's, but Yang Yan's was a lot gentler. There was also a soft and beautiful young woman hanging beside the man. "Aya, Brother Chow, why are you so worried about Wu Chunghua? You can ask the robber to cause trouble for them. If the matter is exposed, they will be killed. If the matter is exposed, can't you just push the blame to him? What are you worried about?" The beautiful woman used her soft body to rub against Yang Chao's arm. She said coquettishly. Yang Chao turned back to look at her, then turned back to look at his sister. He said solemnly, "Both of you don't cause trouble at this time. If Wu Chunghua finds out about my plan because of the trouble you caused, I will deal with you first. But look at my Debeo now. He has been hiding in the quilt since yesterday and pees his pants at the slightest provocation. He is also your nephew. Are you just going to leave him alone?" Yang Yan shouted at Yang Chao. Tisk, Yang Chao narrowed his eyes and said impatiently, "Then why did you let Debeo provoke those people? He was even taught a lesson on the spot. Isn't that enough?" Yang Yan's expression froze, then she continued to say indignantly, "I just don't like that long-haired woman. It was her good fortune that second brother liked her, but she didn't know what was good for her. I just want Debeo to teach her a lesson and help second brother vent his anger. What's wrong with that?" The beautiful woman beside Yang Chao watched Yang Yan finish speaking before turning to Yang Chao and saying, "Big sister Yan is also doing this for brother Huey's own good. There's nothing wrong with that." Seeing that the woman was speaking up for her, Yang Yan felt even more confident. Xiaoyun is right. Big brother, quickly think of a way to deal with those people. I don't care about the others, but I'm going to kill that succubus with sunglasses. It's best to chop off her hands and feet, then throw her into Area F and let those stinky and dirty refugees take turns on her until she dies. Yang Chao frowned and said, "Shut up. Who do you think she is? She dared to make a move in front of everyone in the hall. Was she that easy to deal with? Besides, I sent someone to check on them yesterday. The woman you mentioned came and went without a trace. My men couldn't find any clues about her at all. Moreover, Wu Chunghua is now cooperating with them. He can use this as an excuse to attack us first." Ah bang! After hearing his words, Yang Yan screamed very violently. Then, she suddenly bent down and swept the teapot on the coffee table to the ground. "This won't do, that won't do. Then what do you want me to do? Watch my Debeo be scared like this for no reason? If the child has any sequelae in the future, who will I look for to reason with?" Yang Chao looked at her crazy appearance and covered his forehead with one hand. Okay. Calm down first. Your ability isn't stable to begin with, and if it erupts again, you'll be in trouble. If it erupts again, you'll be the one suffering. I'll deal with this matter. Go back and look after Debeo now." "No, I'm not going back." Yang Yan blurted out in an unstable mood. "Go back." Seeing that not only did she not calm down, but she was also being unreasonable, Yang Chao could only shout at her. Yang Yan, who had been yelled at, was stunned. Then, she turned around unwillingly and walked out the door. At this time, Yang Chao said to the woman beside him, "You should also go back." Oh, the woman was stunned. Then she stood up obediently. After walking a few steps, she turned around and asked, "Then can I come back at night?" Yang Chao said lightly, "I'll send someone to inform you." "Okay then." The woman turned around unwillingly. Yang Chao looked at the time and then stood up. He went to the kitchen and boiled a pot of water. Then, he took out the coffee powder, which was very luxurious in the apocalypse, and made a cup of instant coffee. After stirring it with a fork, he carried the coffee to the balcony and stood there. His eyes looked into the distance as he drank the freshly brewed coffee mouthful by mouthful. When he finished the cup of coffee, he turned around and entered the house. Just then he heard someone knocking on the door. Then, a soldier opened the door and came in. "Leader, Mr. Tang is here." Yang Chao nodded. "Let him in." The soldier opened the door and saw a man walk in. After Tang he came in, he watched the soldier behind him close the door. Then he walked to the sofa in the living room. "Sit first. I'll make the coffee," Yang Chao said as he took the cup to the kitchen and made 2 more cups of coffee. Then he walked out with it. Tang he looked at him and said, "Those people are going to set off today. Apart from Lin Feng, who has just reached rank 6, there are a few rank 5 ability users leading them. that Yuan Tianqing actually didn't go with them. Isn't he afraid that something will happen? Yang Chao pushed a cup of coffee to the coffee table in front of him and said, "No, you just didn't see that there are some experts hidden behind them." Tang He heard his words and asked curiously, "Experts? You mean there's someone behind him?" Yang Chao nodded. "There's one person who doesn't seem to be simple. I sent someone to investigate yesterday, but they didn't find anything." Tang He said, "Then, according to what you said, that person might set off with the Lin family? You don't know his background. Will it affect me if I make a move here?" Yang Chao shook his head and said, "No, the plan needs to be changed. You don't need to go with them. You just need to capture this woman in the base. I'll handle the rest." As he said that, he took out a photo and placed it on the table. Then he pushed it toward him. The woman in the photo was Lin Wenwen's face and long black hair. Tang He looked at the woman in the photo. A light flashed in his eyes and he licked his lips. He stared at the photo and asked, "This woman is very hot. Who is she?" Yang Chao said, "She's the youngest sister of the Lin family. You can do whatever you want with her after capturing her. But hide her for me. I have a plan for the next step." Chapter 331. When he heard Yang Chao say that he wanted to secretly capture this woman and then give her to him as a toy, he was shocked. Tang He looked at him in surprise. "Huh? You don't intend to keep such a graceful beauty for yourself? You gave it to me?" Yang Chao said, "I can give this one to you, but leave the one with the katana beside her to me. I need a change of taste." Tang He smirked and said, "Oh, so you like this type now? All right then." Yang Chao indifferently glanced at him and said, "It won't be too late for you to make a move when Wu Chengyue leads the army out to pack up winter supplies. However, you can't kill this woman, but don't keep her for too long either, because I want to put the zombie virus on her, and then let her become a zombie and go crazy in the base. This way we can use the fact that they might be infected by the zombie virus to control them. At that time, even if Wu Chengyue wants to rush back, it will be too late." Tang He looked at him and said with a smile, "Your plan is too sinister, but I like it." Yang Chao drank a cup of coffee and continued confidently, "I've received intelligence that Wu Chengyue will be setting off in 2 days. So you have to endure it for now." Tang He nodded and said, "All right. I'll wait for them to leave before making my move." On the other side of the square, Lin Xiao returned to the gathering place and looked at the time. It was already noon. Apart from Wu Chengyue's 350 men, everyone else was called over. Seeing Lin Xiao return, everyone looked at her curiously. Li Zheng asked, "How is it? Did you find him?" Lin Xiao nodded. "We found him, but his condition isn't good." "What's going on?" The woman's curiosity makes Mrs. Lin and Cheng Wangxue come closer. Lin Xiao said, "It's no different from death." When it was almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Xiao Yunlong and Chan Yuding were seen driving an off-road vehicle, followed by several modified Jiefeng 141s, which were full of soldiers. The other one was empty. Seeing that the car had arrived, Lin Xiao said to Lin Feng, "The car is here. Let's do a head count and get on the car." Lin Feng turned his head knowingly and shouted to Li Zheng and the others, "Li Zheng, do a head count and get in the car. That one is empty." As he spoke, he pointed at the last empty car. Li Zheng and the others immediately gathered the 20 or so people behind them and got them into the car. Lin Xiao stood on the spot and casually glanced around. "There are quite a lot of spies, but I don't know which powers they are." After getting in the car drove towards the gate of the base. Xie Dong, who was in a corner of the square, silently watched Lin Xiao and the others leave before walking towards the mechanism building. Because Lin Wenwen stayed in the base, even though Long Qingying and Yuan Tianqing were there. However, it was hard to guarantee that no one would attack them from behind, so Lin Xiao kept Xie Dong here. As long as he didn't speak, no one would know what was wrong with him. His level was not high, but because his ability had been restored, he had risen to level 4. But he was a zombie, so he was very sensitive to the behavior of others. Therefore, it shouldn't be a problem to secretly protect Lin Wenwen. Lin Xiao walked towards a corner that no one was paying attention to, and then disappeared. No one could sense her movements, even Xiao Yunlong, Lin Feng and the others did not know her whereabouts. In any case, she would naturally appear when she felt like it was time for her to appear. Sure enough, after a few kilometers out of the base, Lin Xiao appeared on the roof of the last car. Anyway, the location of the map was given to Lin Feng, who was in front, so Lin Xiao silently followed behind. At this time in the lake in Lin Xiao's space, Lu Jun sat on the sofa and watched Tong Tong play with the grass plane that Lin Xiao made for him. Qiu Lily was still lazily lying on the other sofa, playing with her long hair. Suddenly, there was a wave on the lake, and then a woman slowly walked up from the lake. Her head was lowered, and her long hair was wet and covered her entire face. He limped over completely naked. "She's up." Qiu Lily immediately sat up from the sofa, then stretched out her nose and sniffed. She turned into a zombie, but her breath is a bit strange. It's not like a normal zombie. Lu Jun thought for a moment and said, "It's the same as Xiedong's." Qiu Lily's eyes immediately lit up. "Oh yes, they are the same." At this time a figure flashed by the lake. Lin Xiao suddenly appeared, stood by the lake and watched the woman walk in. Lu Jun stood up, walked to Qiu Lily's big wardrobe and found a set of clothes. Now, Qiu Lily's big wardrobe not only had the clothes that Qiu Lily had collected before, but also many kinds of clothes that Lin Xiao had collected later. And even the wardrobe had a few more clothes. Lu Jun took the clothes and walked behind Lin Xiao, watching the woman in the water walk up like a female ghost with disheveled hair. Lin Xiao watched her stagger in front of him and then stopped. Her hanging hair kept dripping water, and her body was lifeless. "Raise your head," Lin Xiao said to her. Shen Yuzhen slowly raised her head, and a pair of empty eyes peeked out from the gap of her hair. She looked at Lin Xiao blankly, and her eyes were very blank. Lin Xiao felt the breath on her body, and it was completely the same as Xiedong's. And it also carried an inexplicable connection with him. So when Shen Yuzhen walked out of the water, she directly came to him. It was probably this connection that made her walk over unconsciously. Hearing Lin Xiao's question, Shen Yuzhen's blank eyes were stunned, and then she seemed to be thinking. Slowly her eyes became clear and hatred, anger, despair, love, shock, and other complex emotions intertwined in her eyes. In her eyes there were still white. Like Xiedong, her appearance didn't change much. She didn't have the dark eyes of a zombie, and no dark circles. Except for the pale skin, she was no different from a normal person. But Lin Xiao knew that she probably couldn't speak. Sure enough, Shen Yuzhen opened her mouth. Just as she wanted to say something, she quickly stopped. Her eyes flashed with doubt. "Roar." Lin Xiao nodded. "Okay, I got it. You still have your memory, that's all. At least I didn't break my promise to Chan Yuding." Shen Yuzhen heard him mention Chan Yuding, and her eyes flashed with tenderness. She nodded, thought for a moment, and then opened her mouth. "Roar, roar." "Thank you." Lin Xiao shook his head and said, "Don't thank me, I also have a condition. In the future, you and Chan Yuding can only leave Sea City Base and follow me." Lu Jun, who was on the side, took the clothes and handed them to Shen Yuzhen, and said to her, "Have you realized your current identity?" Shen Yuzhen took the clothes and saw Lu Jun's eyes. She was stunned for a moment but didn't care much. After hearing Lu Jun's words, she stopped putting on the clothes. Then she nodded. Chapter 332. Shen Yuzhen remembered what had happened before, even though she was completely unconscious at the end. But after Chan Yuding and the others found her, she became sober again. She also heard some of Dr. Liang's words. She remembered that the doctor said that she was infected with the zombie virus. She couldn't speak and her hands and feet were stiff. She felt that she was no longer a living person. Shen Yuzhen raised a hand and covered the position of her heart. Just as she had expected, there was no pulsating sensation. Lin Xiao said, "Put on your clothes first. Chen Yuding is outside. If you want to see him, I'll send you out." Shen Yuzhen suddenly shook her head violently, as if she didn't want to see Chan Yuding again. Lin Xiao knew what she was thinking and said to her, "You haven't changed. You're no different from before. Don't you want to see him? And if he loves you, he shouldn't care about this." Shen Yuzhen lowered her head and silently put on her clothes. Lin Xiao said, "Well, you can stay here if you don't want to. Get used to your current state and identity." Shen Yuzhen put on her clothes, then looked up at Lin Xiao and Lu Jun. She turned her head and looked around. Suddenly, she raised her nose and sniffed in the direction of the sofa. Then her eyes were tightly glued to Tong Tong on the sofa. Lu Jun saw her slowly showing a hungry look and said to her, "That's my son. You can't do anything to him. If you're really hungry, go drink the water in the lake. It can suppress your hunger." Shen Yuzhen was stunned and then turned to look at the lake behind her in surprise. Lin Xiao saw that she had no other questions and turned to leave the space. Roar! Wait a minute. Feeling that Lin Xiao was about to leave, Shen Yuzhen suddenly called her. Lin Xiao looked back at her and asked, "What's wrong?" Roar! Can I go out? Shen Yuzhen looked at her and asked. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "Are you going back to take revenge?" She crossed her arms in front of her chest and raised one hand to touch her chin and said to Shen Yuzhen, "Although I cut off one of those people's legs, they are not dead. But now they are all in the hands of Wu Chengyue. It seems that Wu Chengyue wants to use them to deal with Yang Chao. If you want to go back and kill them, Wu Chengyue probably won't let you do it now." Roar! It wasn't them. Shen Yuzhen shook her head and said to her. Lin Xiao's eyes flashed as he looked at her. "You mean the mastermind? Could it not be Yang Chao's younger brother, or his subordinate?" She knew that Yang Chao's younger brother, Yang Hui, and one of his deputy chiefs were the people she saw fighting with Chen Yuding that day. They all liked to make a move on other people's women behind their backs and then destroy the corpses to get rid of the evidence. Shen Yuzhen lowered her head slightly, and her aura became a little irritable. Roar! I want to tear him apart with my own hands. Lin Xiao looked at her in silence for a moment. Lu Jun didn't know what happened to Shen Yuzhen, but he saw that her emotions were so unstable. He could roughly guess that she had encountered some sort of injustice or bad thing. Does she want to go back and take revenge? The enemy is a high-ranking official in High City? Lin Xiao nodded and said, "The relationship between her husband and Wu Chengyue is a bit sensitive. Therefore, Wu Chengyue's enemies started to attack her. Their main purpose should be to hurt her husband and Wu Chengyue." Thinking of a woman falling into the hands of those men with status in the base after the doomsday, Lu Jun thought. Lu Jun just silently looked at Shen Yuzhen. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and said to Shen Yuzhen, "Well, your current situation is not stable yet, and you haven't familiarized yourself with your body. Besides, even if you go out, you can't enter the base like this. I'll take you in the next time I go back. Don't worry, I won't let you wait too long." Shen Yuzhen saw that she promised to take her back, so she nodded. She didn't have any thoughts of protesting against the other zombies here. So when Lin Xiao said that she would take her back, she felt relieved. In the base, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying stood by the window of the mission hall, watching Lin Xiao's motorcade leave. Long Qingying looked at her disapprovingly. "You should go with them, even if you have to stay to help the deputy chief. It's too dangerous for you to stay here and let your brother stay." Lin Wenwen shook her head and said, "I'm not afraid of danger. Brother Qianxing is here. He won't let anything happen to me." At this time Lin Wenwen talked about Yuan Tianqing. There was a faint trace of love in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. But Long Qingying saw it and said to her, "You should know that the deputy chief has someone else in his heart. Do you think this is equivalent?" Lin Wenwen turned her head to look at Yuan Tianqing and the others in the distance, then looked back at her and smiled. "If one day he forgets my sister, then he might see me by his side. Even if I have to wait until death, it will be worth it." Long Qingying sighed and didn't say anything. Lin Wenwen liked Yuan Tianqing, but Yuan Tianqing liked her sister. She couldn't walk into his heart, but she didn't want to leave or give up. Now that Lin Xiao, the leader of hell, was dead, maybe this was an opportunity. Although Lin Wenwen never thought that her sister would die. So now, as long as there was a chance, she wanted to get closer to Yuan Tianqing. On the other side of the base, in the small building of Wu Chengyue's house, Wu Yueling was chasing a gray-furred rabbit on the empty ground in the living room. She seemed to be having a good time. The gray-furred rabbit was like a big gray ball, jumping around on the ground. It didn't jump far away but just around Wu Yueling. Xiao Liqing found a sealed box and said to Wu Chengyue, who was sitting on the sofa reading documents, "Found it?" Wu Chengyue looked up and saw the box in his hand. He nodded and said, "Give it to Yuan Tianqing. We're going out tomorrow and I don't think we can wait for her to come back. Just ask Yuan Tianqing to give it to her." Xiao Liqing nodded, then turned around and left. Soon, Xiao Liqing found Yuan Tianqing in the mission office. Deputy Chief Yuan. He walked over and greeted Yuan Tianqing with a smile. Yuan Tianqing turned around and saw it was him. He smiled and said, "Little Cheng, don't call me Deputy Chief anymore. I'm not that anymore. Just call me Mr. Yuan." Xiao Liqing nodded and said with a smile, "Okay, Mr. Yuan." He took out the box and handed it to him. "This is what our chief asked you to give to Miss Lu in the sunglasses. We'll have to trouble you to help." Yuan Tianqing, Lin Wenwen, and Long Qingying all looked curiously at the box that he handed over. "What's this?" Xiao Liqing said, "Contact lenses." As soon as he said that, the others immediately nodded. "Oh." Chapter 333. At 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Lin Xiao's motorcade entered the center of Hangzhou. Are we going to Hangzhou Zombie City? The workers who came here by themselves were a little panicked. Looking at the increasing number of zombies around them, these people showed fear in their eyes. Especially those who were ordinary people. We're not going. We're going back. You're all liars. Did you bring us here to use us as bait? Yes. We're not going. Although Chun Yuding's team members didn't shout, they were also panicking. Only a few of them seemed to be unafraid. Hey, what are you panicking about? It's just a zombie. If one comes, we'll blow its head off. If two comes, we'll also blow its head off. It's better than going back without food. A buzzing voice sounded. Everyone looked and saw a big guy who was at least 1.9 meters tall. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, a wide face, and a high nose. His hair was cut flat, but it was uneven. It seemed that it wasn't cut by a professional hairdresser. The others looked at him and said loudly, "You're a psychic. Of course you're not afraid of zombies. You can get food from any mission in the base. How can you be hungry?" The big guy shook his head and said naively, "Oh, the food I get from the mission isn't enough for me, and I don't dare to go out alone. The others don't want to go out with me." At this time, a faint voice suddenly said, "Why are you so anxious? Look carefully, those zombies don't dare to come near us. Didn't you notice?" The others looked towards the voice and saw a young man wearing a very old square frame glasses sitting on the side with his arms crossed. His eyes under the glasses were staring at the road outside of the car, observing something. Then he turned his head and looked at Lin Yu's team, who had been quiet, before moving his eyes away. When the others saw him, they seemed to be infected by his indifferent aura. Suddenly they calmed down a little and looked outside as well. Then as they watched, they really saw the zombies on the road after discovering their team. They didn't crazily rush towards them. Instead, their movements seemed to freeze for a moment. Then they turned around and ran away. What? It's true. They all ran away. What's going on? The tall man looked around in surprise. Quick, look over here. Looks like it too. No wonder it was so peaceful along the way. There were no zombies. Lin Xiao, who was sitting in front, turned his head to look at the people behind him, then turned his head back. Chun Yuding and Lin Feng, who were in front, followed the map given by Lin Xiao. After walking for half an hour, they arrived at the government complex in Uptown. It really took a long time to get in, because they had been blocking the way all the way. Their car was too big, and they could not go around small roads. He had no choice but to get down and push away the abandoned cars on the road before he could drive through. When they arrived at the government complex, it took them quite some time to get there. Fortunately, there were a lot of people in the carriage. If they couldn't get through, the soldiers would go down and open up a path. Or he could just use his special ability. But their destination wasn't here, but the Victoria Hotel on the other side. They were just passing by. When they were about to reach the hotel, Lin Xiao suddenly stood up. Then, with a leap of his legs, he directly jumped onto the car in front of him and continued to jump forward. He directly jumped in front of Lin Feng's car. "Wait here for a moment." Lin Xiao stopped their car on the road and said to the people in the car. She turned and walked toward the hotel on the side of the road. Xiao Yunlong poked his head out of the window. "What is she going to do?" Chun Yuding shook his head. Lin Feng said, "Well, clear the zombies." The others looked at him. Why did she have to go alone to clear the zombies? Wouldn't it be faster if there were more people? Lin Feng said, "In fact, most of the zombies nearby have escaped. She is just going to find those who are still hiding in the hotel." Also, think about her identity. The moment she releases her aura, it won't be a problem. Once she releases her breath, she doesn't even need to do anything. Those zombies will run away by themselves. Xiao Yunlong nodded. Just now, after they had asked the question, they had already remembered the identity of this Miss Lu. Lin Xiao walked into the hotel. The hotel wasn't high, but it was spacious and there were more than 200 rooms. And the decoration inside was very good. If the power supply could be connected to solar energy, it could be used as a residence. There was also a commercial square opposite and the location was very good. Originally, there were a lot of zombies in this area, but after sensing that Lin Xiao was coming with the convoy, they all scrambled to escape. Lin Xiao entered the hotel and then strolled around the hotel. Then the people outside saw a few zombies suddenly jump out of the window upstairs of the hotel. After waiting for another 10 minutes, they saw Lin Xiao come out. She stood on the road in front of the hotel and waved to them. "It's okay, come down." After Xiao Yunlong and the others drove the car over, the soldiers all got out of the car. Lin Xiao said to Xiao Yunlong, Lin Feng and Chen Yuding who came in front of her, "Before the end of the work, we will stay in this hotel. There are more than 200 rooms here, which is enough. Do you have any objections?" The three shook their heads at her. Anyway, she had the final say on the location. Even if they wanted to object, they couldn't find a reason. Because she was the existence that controlled absolute security. If they objected to her, what would they do if she directly turned around and left? If she left, the zombie horde not far from here was not a joke. There were thousands of them, and they could be exhausted to death. Seeing that they had no objections, Lin Xiao nodded. Then she said, "Oh, that's right. Leave the room on the top floor for us. Don't let anyone go up there, you know." Lin Feng and the others looked at each other and nodded knowingly. Lin Xiao turned around and suddenly jumped onto a tree on the side of the road, and then jumped from the tree to the roof of the hotel. She directly jumped up. Lin Feng and the other two immediately turned back and called out to their people. Then they gathered in the hotel lobby. Lin Xiao stood on the roof and flashed into the space, ready to release Cho Lily and the other two. But as soon as she went in, she was entangled by a few jade white vines as soon as she stood firm. Little man seemed to be waiting for her. "Mama, mama, mama. Little man wants to level up. Quickly help little man find a big energy nucleus." Lin Xiao looked at her in surprise. "Hey, didn't I just give you a lot of level 4 or 5 corpse nuclei? Not enough." Little man said with a little dissatisfaction. "Well, those are not even enough to fill the gap between little man's teeth, and they have already been transferred to the newcomer." As she spoke, little man pulled out a vine and pointed its tip in the direction of Shen Yuzhen. Lin Xiao looked at Shen Yuzhen and saw that she was sitting opposite Lu Jun and Cho Lily. She looked a little reserved, as if she didn't dare to move. Maybe because she was too close to Cho Lily, she was completely suppressed by her imposing manner. Chapter 334. Lin Xiao turned to Man and said, "Okay. Then I'll find a way to catch a big one for you, or find some energy cores of mutant plants for you." Man heard this and said happily, Yes, mommy. Level up for me." Man wants to go out. Lin Xiao asked her in surprise, "You want to go out?" Man shook her vines and said, "I want to go." Lin Xiao nodded. It seemed that this child was tired of staying here. "All right. Wait for me to finish dealing with the matters here first. I'll take you to find the energy core." Man happily shook her vines. Okay. Lin Xiao let go of her hand and then walked to Cho Lily. "We're here. Go out and arrange your work and find a place you want to live." Cho Lily and Lu Jun immediately stood up. Seeing that Lin Xiao was going to send them out, Meng, who had been hiding in the forest, also ran out. Lin Xiao sent them out first and then came in to send the zombies from the 1st to the 7th team out. Only Shen Yuzhen was left in the space. The zombies stood on the roof and Lin Xiao said to everyone, "I told them that the roof and the floor below are all our territory. Everyone can pick their own rooms. As for the floors below, don't go down unless Lily and I give the order. Understand?" She said to the zombies 1 to 7, and then stared at Meng, who had already slipped to the edge of the building and was looking down, and said, "And you, come back and listen to me." Meng was curiously lying on the edge of the building, and when she was about to run to the other side, she was stopped by Lin Xiao. "Oh, got it." She walked over unwillingly. Lin Xiao said to Cho Lily, after I leave Lily, you and Meng Meng can't leave here together. Someone with a higher level has to stay, got it? Cho Lily nodded and said, got it. Then I'll go down and choose a room. Then she turned around and went downstairs with her 2 long ponytails swinging behind her. Lu Jun also silently carried Tong Tong down. Anyway, there was nothing for her to do here. Lin Xiao said to the remaining 8 zombies, remember the aura of these people? Then chase the surrounding zombies 2 kilometers away. Gather them and block all the entrances and exits. This is also your territory. You have to guard it yourselves, understand? Roar, got it. All the zombie leaders responded in unison. Lin Xiao continued, kill all those above level 3 and give me their corpse cores. If you can't beat your opponent, remember to ask for help from the person next to you. You guys are together now, so you have to help each other, okay? Roar. Oh, the zombie leaders, who were used to acting alone, reluctantly responded. Lin Xiao waved at them and said, go. 5 zombie leaders and 2 mutant zombies ran off in 7 different directions, quickly disappearing from Lin Xiao's line of sight. Only Meng Meng remained where she was, looking left and right. Let's go down and find your own room, Lin Xiao said as he led her down the stairs. Following Cho Lily's scent, they found a room. After entering, they saw Cho Lily standing in the middle, waving her hands and using her wind ability to roll the dust in the room into a ball. Lu Jun wasn't here, but Lin Xiao knew that she was next door with Tong Tong. After Cho Lily rolled the dust out the window and blew it into the air, it was blown away by the wind. But when she turned around, she saw Meng Meng rolling around on the bed she was looking at. Ah, that bed is mine. You're putting your scent on it. Get off. Cho Lily saw Meng Meng's actions and immediately yelled. She swung her long hair and rushed over, sending Meng Meng flying with a kick. Meng Meng reacted quickly and rolled off the bed, then poked her head out and said, roar roar. I want to share a room with you. Cho Lily wasn't having it. She stared at her and said, why do you want to share a room with me? There's only one bed here. Go to another room. Who knew that Meng Meng would just crawl under the bed? Roar roar no. Lin Xiao looked at the 2 of them. It was obvious that Meng Meng wanted to stay by Cho Lily's side. I'll be leaving for Haicheng Base in a while. On the way, I'll find a crystal core for little man. You guys keep an eye on this place. Don't let any outsiders cause trouble, Lin Xiao said as she stood at the door and prepared to leave. Cho Lily was bending over by the bed, trying to pull Meng Meng out. When she heard Lin Xiao's words, she straightened up. Huh, is it for little man? Is she going to level up again? Lin Xiao walked to the door and replied, yes, she seems to want to come out very much. With that, she walked out of the room. She turned around and went to Lu Jun's room next door. She saw that Lu Jun had Tong Tong stand on the empty ground by the door. Then she cleaned up the dust and rubbish in the room. I'm going to leave for Haicheng now. Take Tong Tong with you. If there's anything, ask Lily for help, Lin Xiao said to her. Lu Jun was flipping through the old quilt on the bed. Then she straightened up and looked at Lin Xiao. Is little man coming out? She's probably tired of staying inside. Lin Xiao leaned against the door and nodded. Maybe. Got it. Lu Jun nodded and suddenly thought of something. Then she looked at her and asked, by the way, why did you let Miss Wenwen stay in Haicheng? There are a lot of people there. What if she runs into trouble in the base? You're not there now. Lin Xiao said, it's not that I want her to stay, it's that she wants to stay. If she doesn't want to go with me, can I still kidnap her? I respect her decision. And isn't Yuan Tianxing still in the base? He won't let anything happen to her. Recently, she had noticed the meaning behind the way Lin Wenwen looked at Yuan Tianxing. If the 2 of them were a couple, it wouldn't be a bad thing. If she handed her sister over to a former subordinate, at least she would know what he was like. This was much more reassuring than handing her over to other messy men in the apocalypse. Lu Jun shook his head and said with some worry, not necessarily. The situation in the base is starting to become unstable. If someone targets Miss Wenwen, I'm afraid even Deputy Leader Yuan will fall. Lin Xiao's eyes flashed. Don't worry, as long as Wu Changyue is still in the base these 2 days, those people won't dare to make a move. What's more, when I went out this time, I planned to immediately head back once I arrived here. It was only a 2-hour journey. Even if I went to find the energy core for little man on the way, I would return to Ocean City by tomorrow at the latest. They can't do anything in such a short period of time. Xiao Yunlong's car can be left behind. Lu Jun thought for a moment, nodded and said, "What you said is right. Just one night, I believe those people won't make a move so quickly." Chapter 335. After Lin Xiao came out of Lu Jun's room, she went downstairs. When she arrived at the hall, she saw that Lin Feng and the others had already cleaned up the sofa in the hall. Although it wasn't very clean, it was enough for people to sit on. In any case, people weren't so particular in the end of the world. Lin Xiao walked over and said to them, "You've already arranged it? I won't participate in the construction of the wall. We'll start after Yuan Tianxing comes. I'll go back to the base first. I have other things to do on the way, so I won't be going with you. Deputy Leader Xiao, you can walk slowly behind me." Lin Feng, Xiao Yunlong, and Chen Yuding all looked at her in surprise. "You're leaving? So fast? Alone?" Lin Xiao stood in front of them with her hands in her pockets and nodded. "Don't worry. I've already released the zombie team to chase away the zombies. I've also strictly ordered them to guard the periphery. Qiu Lily and Lu Jun will stay here, and I'll leave alone." Hearing that Qiu Lily was staying, the three people on the sofa were slightly relieved. "'Kay then." Chen Yuding looked at her anxiously. "Little Zhan's situation?" Lin Xiao said to him. "She hasn't woken up yet. I'll return her to you when she wakes up. Don't worry, nothing will happen." Chen Yuding looked down with a little disappointment, then nodded gratefully. "Okay." Lin Xiao turned and walked out of the hotel door. When she reached the road, she waved her hand. An unmodified off-road vehicle appeared on the road. She was now a mobile nouveau riche, getting whatever she wanted. Anyway, the things she collected in the space were not just furniture, clothes, and shoes. She also collected a lot of cars that could still be driven, big and small. She even picked up a few electric cars and fuel-efficient cars. Lin Xiao sat in the driver's seat, started the car, and drove back the way she came. She respected Shen Yuzhen's wishes and didn't tell Chen Yuding about her situation. Lin Xiao drove out of the upper city and headed back to Jiaxing. While sniffing in the car, she used her perception to pay attention to the movements along the way. It wasn't until she reached Nanhu that she sensed a very powerful level 5 zombie. It was almost at level 6, but it seemed to be a step away. Lin Xiao immediately turned the car around, retracted his aura, and drove in that direction. Not long after, Lin Xiao found herself in a botanical garden. That zombie was actually in the botanical garden? Lin Xiao stopped the car by the roadside, got off and stored the car into the space. She looked at the botanical garden that had grown into a barren mountain forest. She searched silently for a while before she found the entrance and entered it invisibly. The botanical garden was very large, and the path inside was almost completely covered by the plants that had doubled in size. As for those mutant plants, Lin Xiao could not smell their scent. If the other party had concealed his aura, even Lin Xiao would not have been able to sense it. Lin Xiao could only follow the direction of the level 5 zombie, and at the same time, she carefully observed the surroundings. If he could find a mutated plant that had gained sentience, it might have an energy core. But just when Lin Xiao thought that she would not be able to find the mutated plant so easily, she suddenly felt a huge movement in front of her. The trees here were all very tall. She couldn't find the tallest one. So he gave up the idea of climbing up the tree to scout the situation, and quickly sneaked in that direction on the ground. Roar! Suddenly, the roars of wild beasts came from the front. Hearing this, Lin Xiao felt a little strange. The sound sounded like that of a wild beast, but it did not sound like a normal wild beast. When Lin Xiao quietly approached, she saw the scene in front of her. She understood why the sound just now was like a wild beast but also not like a wild beast. Because it was a zombie beast. Looking at its size, it was already as big as a male lion. The hair from its neck to its back was very long, and clumps of it stood up. The skin and flesh on its body were torn open, dripping with blood. Its pitch-black eyes were filled with an ominous glint, and its mouth was wide open, revealing a mouthful of sharp beast teeth. Roar! This was a giant zombie dog. Looking at the thick hair on its body, it had a terrifying dog head like the ghost mastiff. Its body was even stronger than a male lion, but its skin was bloody, and from time to time, there would be some thick black liquid dripping out of its wounds. It looked very horrifying. This was simply the incarnation of a hellhound. Lin Xiao silently stared at the zombie dog, and suddenly a kind of desire arose in her heart. If she could train this thing into a military dog. But soon, Lin Xiao was not in the mood to think about this, because she was attracted by the zombie dog's opponent. It was the thing that she had been looking for, a mutated demonic tree. The tree looked very strange, and its trunk was very thick, with a diameter of about 1.5 meters. There was no bark on the trunk, and it was a very smooth kind of tree bone. But the color was dark red, and there were black intersecting veins flowing on it. And at the place where it forked up, there was a groove in the middle. There was a stench coming from there, and Lin Xiao could smell it from far away. It was the smell of a rotting flesh. There was not a single leaf on the branches above, but there were countless branches dancing wildly on the branches. In fact, the whole tree was twisting and moving, and those thick branches turned into tentacles, like a group of demons dancing around the demonic tree. As long as it bent down to stretch its branches, the ground would be empty. This tree's aura was also very strong, even stronger than the vine that Lin Xiao encountered by the lake last time. But after looking for a while, Lin Xiao could not find the position of its energy core. Roar! The zombie dog stood at the edge of the open space, a place where the demonic tree could not reach. It lowered its limbs, raised its head, and roared at the demonic tree. Suddenly it kicked its hind legs, turned into a black shadow, and rushed toward the demonic tree's trunk. It was very fast, like a flash of lightning. Lin Xiao felt that its speed was very fast, but the demonic tree's reaction was even faster than the zombie dog's. Before the zombie dog reached the demonic tree's trunk, all the branches of the demonic tree suddenly surrounded it. Layer by layer, it protected its trunk, and then separated a part of its strength to sweep towards the black shadow. When the zombie dog saw that its attack was ineffective, it quickly turned around and jumped to the side, dodging the demonic tree's extended branches. But the zombie dog did not give up, and it suddenly went around the demonic tree and suddenly jumped behind it. Then it continued to rush toward the demonic tree. But this time the demonic tree did not shrink its branches back. Instead, it suddenly bent down, as if it wanted to increase the distance between it and the zombie dog. However, the zombie dog had already pounced on it. Not good. When Lin Xiao saw the situation, she knew that the zombie dog was going to suffer. Sure enough, as soon as she finished speaking, the demonic tree that was bent very low suddenly bounced back with a hoo sound. And so the branches instantly closed up, turning into a sturdy broom, and slapped the zombie dog back. Roar! The zombie dog screamed, and then fell heavily to the ground. Chapter 336. But soon, the zombie dog stood up from the ground without any problems. It shook its fur and continued to roar at the demonic tree. Roar dash, then it suddenly opened its mouth at the demonic tree, revealing a mouthful of white sharp teeth. Lin Xiao felt a surge of energy in its body. After a while, a surge of energy rushed out of the zombie dog's mouth. Roar dash, it roared at the demonic tree. A purplish-red flame came out of its mouth and rushed towards the demonic tree. When it encountered the purplish-red flame, the demonic tree suddenly shrank. Moreover, it bent back with all its might, trying to avoid the attack of the flame. There was a surge of energy in the middle of the demonic tree, as if it was protecting itself from being eroded by the flame. Thus, Lin Xiao watched as a level 5 zombie dog breathed fire from its mouth to burn a bald tree trunk that had shrunk into a ball. The zombie dog was also very strong. The fire in its mouth continued to burn for 2 to 3 minutes before stopping. Lin Xiao could feel that the temperature of the flame was very high because although the surrounding plants were not burned, they quickly withered. The zombie dog's flames were controlled to only burn the demonic tree's area of effect, so it wouldn't affect the surrounding trees. But even so, the temperature of its flame still dried up the surrounding plants. Lin Xiao unconsciously retreated a distance. There was no other way, it was too hot. If it was an ordinary tree, after being burned by the zombie dog's flame for 2 to 3 minutes, not even ashes would be left. However, the demonic tree was only tightly wrapped into a ball, like a giant black fist. No matter how the flame burned, it was not affected at all. The zombie dog saw that after burning for so long, there was no effect on the demonic tree, so it put away the flame. Then it bared its teeth and pounced at the demonic tree, using its front claws to claw at the demonic tree. Lin Xiao looked at the demonic tree in surprise. There was actually a wood that was not afraid of fire. How magical! Xiao Dash, the zombie dog, pounced forward with its equally sharp claws. It clawed at the demonic tree and then fell to the ground. Then it pounced again, using its claws to claw at the demonic tree. The flame was useless against the demonic tree, but the zombie dog's claws were particularly useful. Puff, puff, puff. A few bare branches were immediately cut down by it. The demonic tree, which had its branches cut off by the zombie dog, seemed to shake violently. Then he probably felt that the zombie dog might not be able to spit fire for a while, so he immediately let go of the tree fist. Countless branches spread out and immediately rolled towards the zombie dogs that pounced on them. The zombie dog's reaction wasn't fast enough, and its four legs kicked the branches of the magic tree. When he bounced back, he was suddenly entangled by a tree branch that shot out fiercely. "Awoo!" the zombie dog cried out in panic, and then it was suddenly pulled down by the demonic tree. Without waiting for the zombie dog to react, the other branches of the devil tree quickly wrapped around its hind legs. Then he started beating the zombie dog up and down. Bang! 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 Oh, woo! Looking at the zombie dog that looked like a dead dog, Lin Xiao silently shed a drop of sweat for it. Well, of course she didn't sweat. What a painful feeling. Listening to the zombie dog's screams as it was slapped to the ground, Lin Xiao felt that even if it was a zombie, its internal organs would have been smashed. Just when the zombie dog was feeling dizzy from the slaps, the center of the magic tree suddenly opened up, as if it had opened its mouth. Then Lin Xiao saw all the branches of the magic tree wrap around the zombie dog, especially tightly wrapping around its mouth and head, as if to prevent it from spitting fire again. Then it dragged the zombie dog and threw it into the center of the magic tree. At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly moved. She fiercely rushed towards the center of the magic tree. Previously, no matter how badly the magic tree fought with the zombie dog, it would always wrap the center with branches. Therefore, Lin Xiao only silently watched the battle. She didn't expect that the level 5 zombie dog wouldn't last long in the hands of the mutated demonic tree, and it was quickly taken care of. Seeing that the zombie dog was about to be dragged into the middle of the magic tree, Lin Xiao guessed that the magic tree was about to eat. Because of the stench of rotting corpses coming from the middle of the magic tree, it should be where the magic tree ate. Therefore, when she saw the magic tree wrap the zombie dog into a ball and drag it there, Lin Xiao seized the opportunity and rushed forward. Her speed was very fast, and in an instant she flashed above the zombie dog. Then, she stepped on the zombie dog's body and suddenly swung down with her claws. As soon as she waved her hand, she revealed herself. From the battle just now, Lin Xiao could see that the magic tree was immune to magic attacks, and only physical attacks were effective against it. Because the zombie dog's ability fire was useless against it, using her claws to cut off a few branches. Therefore, Lin Xiao immediately decided to use her claws to cut it. Sensing Lin Xiao's sudden appearance, the magic tree panicked. Because Lin Xiao's aura was too dangerous to the magic tree, and her position just happened to be where the magic tree's life gate was wide open. Moreover, as soon as Lin Xiao appeared, her attack also followed. But after her claws swung down, her figure immediately flashed and disappeared from the zombie dog's body. Puff, 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 but as soon as she disappeared, a few strange sounds came from the magic tree's body. Then the entire magic tree suddenly stopped moving. As for the zombie dog, when it was originally bound by the magic tree, it sensed danger and immediately became clear-headed. Therefore, when the magic tree sent it to the middle position, it kept struggling and twisting. Now that the magic tree was completely still, only the zombie dog was still moving. As a result, when it moved, it suddenly fell out of the branches. The branches that were originally wrapped around it seemed like a switch was turned off, and all of them loosened up. Then it softly fell to the ground. Pudong! The zombie dog fell to the ground and stood up from the ground in a daze. Then it looked at the mutated magic tree inexplicably. But soon, its expression became vigilant again. It slightly lowered its front limbs and pressed down on its two ears. A pair of fierce zombie beast eyes stared at the surroundings. Lin Xiao dodged, somersaulted in midair, and then steadily landed on the ground. Roar, roar! The zombie dog immediately locked its gaze on her, and then it pressed its head down with its teeth. Kacha kacha. At this time, the magic tree suddenly made a cracking sound, and then it really split open from the middle. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The magic tree that had split open a few branches loudly fell to the ground. From the place where the thick tree trunk had split open, a strong stench assaulted their nostrils. Moreover, as the trunk split open, the trunk was hollow, and there were some bones and thick liquid flowing out. The source of the stench was probably the liquid formed from the bones and flesh. Lin Xiao couldn't stand it anymore, and she covered her nose and walked towards the magic tree that had fallen to the ground. After cutting open the tree, she sensed the location of the energy core. Chapter 337. Roar dash. At this time, the zombie dog didn't take advantage of this time to leave. Instead, when it saw Lin Xiao walking towards the magic tree, it went berserk. With a fierce roar, it stomped its forelegs and rushed towards Lin Xiao. Then it jumped up high and pounced towards Lin Xiao with its claws. Lin Xiao turned around and casually swung her arm. Bang dash, the huge dog that weighed a few hundred kilograms was swatted away like a fly. Stand properly. Don't move. Lin Xiao pointed at it and shouted loudly. Roar dash, the zombie dog that got up didn't listen to her at all and rushed over again. It continued to pounce on her. Lin Xiao turned around again and directly waved her other hand. Pa dash, another slap and the zombie dog was swatted back. But this time, after Lin Xiao slapped it back, she didn't continue to stand in place. Instead, she instantly rushed over. When the zombie dog fell to the ground with a bang, she suddenly jumped onto the dog's neck and forcefully waved her fist. I told you to stand properly, but you didn't listen? You're a zombie and you're not afraid of being beaten, right? See if I don't beat you to death, you stupid dog. As she spoke, she began to use her fist to hit the zombie dog's head. Bang, bang, bang dash. Roar dash. The zombie dog's head was almost buried in the ground from her continuous hits. Lin Xiao didn't use much strength to hit it, so it couldn't break its head. At most it would be knocked into the ground. Oh. The zombie dog's voice became weaker. Only then did Lin Xiao stop and stand up from its body. She didn't care that her pants were stained with the zombie dog's blood and pointed at it and shouted again. Don't move. Roar. After shouting, she also roared at it. This last warning roar successfully calmed the zombie dog down. Lin Xiao then turned around and continued to walk towards the magic tree while covering her nose. When she saw the black and smelly liquid flowing on the ground, she stopped in her tracks. Then, he looked left and right before picking up a tree branch. The originally soft and movable branch of the magic tree had now become a dry and hard branch. Lin Xiao took the branch and stepped on the tree trunk beside him. Then he used the branch to rummage through the pile of animal bones. When she flipped the bones to one side, she saw an energy core embedded in the middle of the tree trunk. Lin Xiao waved his claws at the location of the energy core a few times and the tree trunk was cut into pieces. She continued to use the branch to rummage through the pile of wooden blocks. Soon she found the one with the energy core. Then he used the branch to pick it out. When he picked out the energy core from the pile of dirty liquid, Lin Xiao suddenly had a glass of water in his hand and poured it on the energy core. After washing the energy core with water, Lin Xiao bent down to pick up the wooden block of the energy core. Lin Xiao looked at the sphere that looked like a lump on a tree trunk. It was a little smaller than her fist. However, she could feel a strange energy in her hand. She was about to take it into the space to ask Little Man if she wanted it when she saw the zombie dog quietly crawl up. It lay on the ground and quietly moved its forelegs like a turtle, crawling into the forest bit by bit. Where do you want to go? Lin Xiao looked at its movements and suddenly asked. Following Lin Xiao's voice, the zombie dog's crawling movement froze. Then it turned its head and meowed pitifully at Lin Xiao. Awoo. Lin Xiao walked over and bent down to grab the dirty and sticky fur on its neck. Then she directly flashed and brought it into the space. After entering the space, Lin Xiao threw it to the side with a plop. Don't move. Lin Xiao saw that it was ready to roll and escape as soon as it landed on the ground and immediately shouted at it. After being shouted at by her, the zombie dog immediately became obedient. At this time, Lin Xiao didn't need to shout at the lake. A few thick jade white vines had already emerged from the lake. He reached out towards her. To be precise, they were coming towards the piece of wood in her hand. Lin Xiao directly waved her hand and threw the wood towards her. Little man immediately caught it accurately, then curled it up and shrunk into the water. But she still stretched out a long vine and wrapped it around Lin Xiao's hand. Mama, mama, mama. This is good. This is good. This energy smells so good. Lin Xiao thought of the bones and dirty water outside and the pungent stench. She really didn't know what smelled good. Do you know what level the energy core of this tree is? Little man said. Level 4. Lin Xiao nodded and pointed to the dog lying on the ground beside her and said, no wonder this thing is already level 5, but still can't beat a tree. Mutated plants or animals have always been stronger than zombies or psychics. Because their oddities are different from the normal rules, they are considered an anomaly. It is hard to imagine whether their energy or skills are strong or weak. They are very strong when they are strong, but they are also very weak when they are weak. But it is reasonable to say that zombie dogs are generally more aggressive than normal zombies. And this is a level 5 zombie dog. Its attack power and reaction speed are quite close to a level 6 zombie king. Can't even kill a tree. How did the zombie dog become so weak? Lin Xiao thought and suddenly stared at the zombie dog curiously. Little man, who was wrapped around her hand, sensed her thoughts and said to her, Mama, mama, this zombie dog only has claws that can attack this kind of mutated tree. Its fire ability is useless against this kind of mutated tree that can absorb energy. Lin Xiao turned her head to look at little man in surprise. How do you know this dog's ability is fire? And you also know the characteristics of the tree? Little man said with a bit of pride. As long as I enter this space, little man can distinguish all the types of abilities. Lin Xiao understood and said, so that's how it is. Little man said, Mama, mama, this time little man may take a bit longer to absorb. Mama must be prepared. After little man finishes absorbing, then I will repair your stomach. Lin Xiao subconsciously touched her stomach. She was also very curious about what it looked like inside. But she didn't dare to cut open her stomach. What if she ruined little man's previous recovery? She nodded and said, okay, I will wait for you. Little man said happily. With this mutated tree's energy core, Mama and little man will become different. Wait for little man's good news. Lin Xiao heard what she said. It seemed that after she finished absorbing, there would be a very different change. Okay, I will wait for your good news. Little man let go of her and then shrunk back into the lake. Lin Xiao watched little man disappear into the lake, then turned her head to look at the zombie dog that has been curled up on the ground since little man came out. She stared at the zombie dog left and right. So ugly. So disgusting. Chapter 338. The zombie dog's appearance was really ugly. The fur all over its body was cracked, and there was a lot of dirty black blood on it, so it looked like a bunch of puffs. The skin on the corner of its mouth was also cracked, and flesh could be seen inside. Its white teeth were sharp and long, very scary. Lin Xiao squatted beside it and said to it, look at you, so ugly. Even if I take you in, it's not good to take you out to see people. What if you scare the children? Roar dash, the zombie dog turned its head and roared at her, but it didn't dare to really rush at Lin Xiao. Instead it was timid, crawling back. At this moment, a long object was suddenly thrown out of the lake. Lin Xiao reached out and caught it. It was a vine as thick as a thumb, about 4 to 5 meters long, and it was jade white. As soon as she caught the vine, Lin Xiao immediately understood little man's intention. It was for her to use as a dog leash. Come here. Looking at the zombie dog that was moving back a few meters, Lin Xiao shouted to it. Roar dash, the zombie dog protested and refused to go over. Instead it was ready to turn around and run. If you dare run, I'll throw you into the lake when I catch you. I'm telling you. Lin Xiao scolded it. A war dash, the zombie dog that had just run 2 steps suddenly stopped. Lin Xiao tightened the rattan in his hand and said to it, where do you think you can run in here? Huh. Roar dash, the zombie dog turned back and roared at her, then ran towards the direction of the forest. Lin Xiao threw the vine in her hand on the ground like a whip. Then her figure flashed, and she chased after the zombie dog. Lin Xiao could clearly sense where the zombie dog was, and where it was running towards. So Lin Xiao took a shortcut from the side and went in front of it to intercept it. Because of the actions of Lin Xiao and the zombie dog, Shen Yuzhen, who was originally sitting on the sofa, hid behind the sofa. She looked in the direction of the forest with a frightened face. She was already a little afraid of Lin Xiao's aura, but now the zombie dog's aura was even more frightening, because Lin Xiao's other people's auras were all hidden. This zombie dog's aura was completely released. Moreover, it carried a savage wildness, like a ferocious predator. On the other side, when the zombie dog rushed into the forest, it suddenly saw Lin Xiao jump down from the tree in front of it. Then, the white rattan in her hand wrapped around him. Lin Xiao tied a loop at the front of the rattan and jumped down when the zombie dog ran to her side of the tree. She put the loop on the zombie dog's head. By the time the zombie dog reacted, it had already been strangled. Roar! Lin Xiao jumped down from above and pulled the other end of the rope tightly. Then he tied the rope to a nearby tree. Stay still, or I'll really throw you into the lake. Roar, roar, roar! The zombie dog was tied to the tree by her. It pulled on the vines of the small vine while roaring and struggling. After Lin Xiao said that, he turned around and walked out. She left the zombie dog to struggle on its own. After leaving the forest, she saw Shen Yuzhen and stopped to ask, "Do you want to go out with me now? I'm already on the way back to Haicheng. There's still more than an hour's drive." Shen Yuzhen looked worriedly in the direction of the forest and then shook her head at Lin Xiao. She lowered her head with a lonely expression, not knowing what to think. Lin Xiao looked at her and didn't force it. She just nodded and said, "Okay." After leaving the space, Lin Xiao looked at the time. It was almost dark. She let the car out and continued to drive to Haicheng. At this time in Haicheng, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying were still staying in their original house. Yuan Tianxing and the others were still opposite them. Li Zheng's team had already followed Lin Feng to Hangzhou. Only Du Yuanxing, Lu Junjie, and a few other soldiers with no abilities were left here. At this time, Yuan Tianxing and the others were in Lin Wenwen's house. The few of them were leisurely sitting on the sofa in the house. Some were cleaning their guns, some were playing cards, and some were reading. Some were sitting by the window and observing the outside. Lin Wenwen was busy in the kitchen, and Long Qingying helped her bring out plate after plate of dishes. "It's time to eat. Come over." After Long Qingying brought out the last bowl of soup, she raised her head and called out to the others expressionlessly. The men in the living room immediately moved to the dining table and the kitchen. They washed their hands and sat down. They took the bowls to the pot and scooped the rice. "Do you think Miss Lu and the others are coming back soon?" Du Yuanxing bit his chopsticks and turned to look at the dim light outside the window. He suddenly said. Lin Wenwen looked outside and said, "If they're coming back, they should be arriving at the base soon. But Sister Lu's whereabouts have always been elusive. Maybe she's already here. She just hasn't appeared yet." Long Qingying nodded and said, "I agree." Yuan Tianxing looked at Lin Wenwen and asked in confusion, "Why don't you go with them? It's not safe for you two girls to stay in the base. You shouldn't go out often during the day. Let us men handle the recruitment." Lin Wenwen looked up at him and then nodded. Then she said, "I know. I just want to help you." After saying that, she looked away and lowered her head to eat. If this person hadn't suddenly disappeared for more than a month, she wouldn't have wanted to stay by his side so willfully. The fear and worry of losing him was a suffocating torment for her. She didn't want to bear this feeling anymore. So she wanted to stay by his side even if it was dangerous. Even though she knew that she was being willful, she was about to lose control of her heart. Yuan Tianxing was suddenly speechless under her gaze. He turned his head and saw that the others were all looking at him silently with ambiguous smiles on their faces. "What are you looking at? Hurry up and eat," Yuan Tianxing said to them, amused. The others immediately lowered their heads and started eating. "Deputy leader, hurry up and find a wife." At this time Long Qingying, who happened to come over with the food, suddenly said lightly, "Puffed." Du Yuan and the others immediately looked at her. Yuan Tianxing looked at Long Qingying blankly and said, It's very difficult to find a wife." Long Qingying sat down and glanced at him indifferently. She raised her chopsticks and pointed at Lin Wenwen. "What's difficult about it? There's one right in front of you. You can't even fish up the moon because you're so close to the water. Don't you know that there are people lining up by the water?" Lin Wenwen, who was being pointed at with chopsticks, raised her chopsticks awkwardly and hid her away. "Qingqing, what nonsense are you talking about?" Long Qingying turned around and rolled her eyes. "How am I talking nonsense? What do you guys think? As she said that, she looked at Du Yuanxing and the others. Cough that, actually, Qingqing is right. Deputy leader. You can also consider our Miss Wenwen. Du Yuanxing's eyes turned and suddenly said. Lu Junjie and the others just looked at Yuan Tianqing silently, and held their bowls at the same time and nodded. Yuan Tianqing glanced at them. Wenwen is single now, you guys also have a chance. As soon as he said that, the others immediately shut up. They all buried their heads in eating. Chapter 339. On the other side of Wu Chengyue's house, Meng Yu was sitting at the table, eating the rice in her bowl. Her expression was slightly hesitant. Then she suddenly raised her eyes and looked at Wu Chengyue, who was watching Wu Yueling eat. Why did you ask someone to find a pair of cosmetic lenses for that zombie? Wu Chengyue heard her words and looked back at her. What's wrong? I just see her wearing sunglasses every day, it's too suspicious. Why don't you ask someone to find a pair of cosmetic lenses for her? Meng Yu's expression froze for a moment. An inexplicable light flashed in her eyes. She slightly closed her eyes and moved the chopsticks in her hand. Is it because she helped Ling Ling through the awakening? Wu Chengyue nodded and said, yes, that's right. Although I think giving her this as a thank you gift might be a little too light. But I think she will like it. Meng Yu paused for a moment, then smiled and said, yes, it's indeed too light. It's not the first time she saved Ling Ling, but you don't seem to have repaid her. Why don't you marry her? Her last sentence sounded like a joke, so Wu Chengyue just smiled and looked at her. Do you want me to feed the zombies? Then Wu Chengyue looked at Wu Yueling, who was eating the chopsticks, and said, besides, I also want to find a mother for her. But I'm afraid that I will make a mistake and hurt her. Wu Yueling was still not very good with the chopsticks, but she could already eat by herself. Her movements were very clumsy, but she looked very cute. She didn't pay much attention to the conversation between the two adults, but after hearing Wu Chengyue say that he wanted to find a mother for her, she suddenly stopped. Then a light flashed in her big eyes. But she quickly lowered her head and continued to eat, but the light in her eyes was getting brighter and brighter. Meng Yu heard Wu Chengyue's words and felt relieved. She looked at Wu Chengyue and said, actually, if Ling Ling is not your biological daughter, you can have another one. Wu Chengyue shook his head and said, what does this have to do with whether she is biological or not? Even if Ling Ling doesn't have my blood, I still love her. She also loves me as a father. Meng Yu looked at him in silence. Wu Yueling finished the food in her bowl, put down her chopsticks and looked up at Wu Chengyue. Wu Chengyue smiled at her and said, are you full? When you're full, wipe your mouth first, understand? Wu Yueling picked up the napkin on the table and wiped her mouth. Then she jumped off the chair. He trotted towards the living room. You can't run so fast after eating. You'll get a stomachache. Wu Chengyue shouted at her. Wu Yueling immediately stopped and looked back at him. Only then did he walk over. She walked to the sofa and picked up the gray rabbit that had curled up into a ball. She placed it on her short legs and used her small hands to stroke the soft fur on its back. The gray rabbit curled up on her leg and didn't move. It seemed to be enjoying being petted by her. Wu Yueling looked at Wu Chengyue while stroking the gray rabbit, thinking about what he had just said. Was Daddy going to find her a mother? But Ling Ling didn't want anyone else to be Ling Ling's mother. Ling Ling only wanted her father. What the hell is a mother? Is it edible? But if I can get the zombie sister to be with Daddy, it doesn't seem like a bad idea. He didn't know if little man would agree or not. I really want to play with little man. When will the zombie sister come to see Ling Ling? Wu Yueling's brain had already turned a few corners. On the other side, Wu Chengyue still didn't know that his words had attracted the attention of a child. Seeing that Wu Yueling had run to the sofa to play with the rabbit, Wu Chengyue began to eat. After eating, Wu Chengyue and Meng Yu sat on the sofa and talked business. You have to keep an eye on Yang Chao. Also remind Big Tree and Emoli to pay attention to the movements of the research institute. Meng Yu nodded and said, we still haven't found the whereabouts of the robber who secretly cooperated with Yang Chao. Do you think he has already infiltrated the base? Wu Chengyue nodded in agreement and said, it's possible. His original target was Lin Feng and the others, but Lin Feng and the others arrived at our base safely. I think the robber definitely won't give up. It's possible that Yang Chao let him in. and we don't know if he is still in the base, or if he followed Lin Feng and the others out today. Speaking up to this point, he paused and said, but there's that female zombie. Even if the robber is a level 7 psychic, he shouldn't be able to get away with it. Meng Yu asked curiously why? Could it be that this Miss Lu is already above level 6? But I don't feel that her power is that strong. Wu Chongyue shook his head and said, it's not her. It's the other people with her. Or other zombies. He didn't say the last sentence. Ever since the last time this Miss Lu took off her sunglasses and let him see her eyes, Wu Chongyue always felt that the exquisite face seemed a little familiar. Where did he see it before? But in this post-apocalyptic world, women were already rare. Such a beautiful woman, even if he had seen her before, he wouldn't forget her. And on that beautiful face, there was a pair of dark eyes without any white. If he hadn't interacted with her before, perhaps he would feel that her appearance was very strange and scary. But Wu Chongyue didn't know why, but he felt that it was very novel. After he saw that pair of eyes that day, he seemed to see green pupils in them. It didn't look beautiful at all, but it gave people a feeling that they wanted to see it again. Meng Yu asked curiously, there's something else? Or are you talking about zombies? Wu Chongyue looked at her, didn't shake his head or nod. He said, I just feel that there's an even more powerful energy in her body. Meng Yu nodded and said, I also feel that it's indeed different from Miss Lu's own energy. Wu Chongyue said, Yunlong should be back tonight. Tomorrow you stay in the base with him. I'll lead the team out alone. His words made Meng Yu stunned. You want to go out alone? Why? Aren't we all together? In the past, almost every time he went out of the base, he would take her with him. Why did he leave her behind this time? Wu Chongyue said, recently, Yang Chao's hands and feet have been a little restless. I want you two to stay here to look after the base. Zhou Shihui doesn't care. And I'm afraid that Yang Chao will take action when I'm not in the base. Meng Yu looked up at him and opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Wu Chongyue interrupted her. Yu, this is an order. Wu Chongyue looked at her with a faint smile and said, Yu, this is an order. His eyes were still smiling as usual, but there was a bit more sternness and irresistible in them. Meng Yu felt an inexplicable grievance in her heart, but she still nodded. This man had never put her on the same level as him. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.